My grandfather was a park service ranger, and he would always tell me these stories. Apparently, on the plot of land that he owned, there was some kind of weird figure that would appear every so often. Now, you couldn't ask him exactly what it was and get necessarily a clear answer, because it would change from time to time. He basically wasn't sure exactly what it was, and each time he would describe it different, usually using the different emotions of which he felt while spotting it. Exactly the same thing would happen with my grandma. Sometimes it was like this thing was angry, sometimes it was like it was hurting, sometimes it was like it was lonely, and sometimes it was like it was lost. But one thing was sure, they always reported seeing it, and it actually gone back to their parents and grandparents. Now apparently there was some kind of ancient burial site upon this land, and I didn't know about it until I got older. But allegedly, there have been multiple sightings of something tall, skeletal in appearance, which apparently would roam the land randomly. The first time of which it was sighted was near the small river and the lake that's on the back of their property. Apparently, it was seen virtually hovering across the water by my great-grandpa. Apparently he was hunting one day and stopped for a while to rest by it when he saw this thing. Apparently it scared him so much that he actually tried to fire shots at it. He said either he had the worst aim in the world that day, or that thing was some kind of spirit and the shots were going through it. He didn't know. He was so scared that he actually left his gun there. It was out of ammo by that point, but he wanted to get away as quick as possible and not necessarily carry any dead weight whatsoever. The next time it was spotted was by his wife a few years later. Apparently she was out trying to pick wild berries on their property one day when she could see a skeletal head staring at her from behind a tree. At first she thought it was some kind of animal that had died there many years ago and they hadn't realised, but then she said the thing moved. So weird sightings actually come from their guests too, and not only them. Even all the way up to my grandpa. Apparently my grandpa first realised it was there when he was there during one Christmas. And apparently he was out playing with some of the other kids and he noticed a strange gown. He said this time it was red in colour, which was weird because usually it appears as black. At first he thought it was a tree, or at least the stump of a tree, of which was different colour to the rest of the woods, until he realised it was moving and he can see a face. The way that he describes it, now God bless him, he doesn't have much knowledge of Star Wars, but he said it looked like one of the characters with 4 lightsabers. I can't remember the specific name, but you know the one when it's got its hood up, but if it was red. From the sounds of that story, I was pretty creeped out by my grandpa, but then he says there was more. Apparently, there was another time that he was playing with his friends, and he actually saw multiple of this thing. Weirdly, apparently it also had glowing orange eyes. That's how he noticed there was more than one. He can't say for absolute certain because it was quite dark at this time, but he's pretty convinced it was, and they weren't isolated incidents. Now, I actually spent a lot of time out of there. I ended up spending quite a lot of time to just get away from my parents. At least that's what I think they were doing. My grandparents had a lot of time to look after me, so I was often there. My memory of my grandparents was absolutely loving. I honestly couldn't have asked for better grandparents who were more loving or caring. It's something I don't think I really appreciated so much when I was young actually, because they were kind of always there. So it's something that I kind of got a better appreciation for and grasp as when they weren't here, which I always regretted. But anyway, so I remember taking some walks there during the summertime when I was a bit younger. I've grown up with these stories pretty much all my life, so probably about 8 or 9 out of 10 times that I'd actually go out there, I was half expecting to have some kind of horrifying encounter. Though it never really happened, I actually went out there multiple times with an overactive imagination, really wishing that something would happen to me. The stupidest thing I ever did was I actually called for it a few times. Now, I don't know why I actually did this, but again, nothing would happen. I remembered one specific day though when I was out there seemed to be some kind of haze up ahead. It was almost like there was a big filter and there was some kind of fog which wasn't there before suddenly over part of the scenery. I do think to myself that this is particularly weird. It's something I haven't seen before and my young mind can't comprehend it. I had a really weird feeling too, and strangely there was some kind of static in the air which was making the fibres on my jumper stand up and also the hair on my arms and the hair on my head. I looked up scared there was going to be a lightning strike. I've been told about them before. This was before you had the videos to watch on the internet, but I was aware of it. I think maybe they told me in school about it one day, but I digress. I did look up and there was no rain clouds whatsoever. So I think this is specifically weird. It's almost like I'd walked into some kind of electrical storm, of which there was no storm, just the electrical aspects of it. So this was a deeply weird moment. I kind of felt uncomfortable. I've looked up the feeling later on in life and it's similar to what those experience when they're in the vicinity of infrasound. Just a deep unhappiness and feeling that something is off, where your mind and body can't comprehend what's happening. I remembered walking around for a while. I kind of wanted to see the Reaper thing. Every time I said the word Reaper, my grandpa would say, no, that's not it, no. But that's how I described it, and that's how it sounded. So yeah, I was looking for this thing constantly, but nothing would happen, so I headed back. I think this was really odd. I remembered when I got home, my grandparents asked what was wrong with my hair, and I said, I don't know, some kind of storm. They both looked at each other and my grandpa laughed. He knew there wasn't a storm. It was really nice and sunny outside. He thought I was just messing around or something, or had wore one of his hats and not said. He actually brought this up and I said, no, I'm serious. That's what it was. He then laughs and we got about our day. I constantly pester him though to learn more and more about the Reaper. He tells me not to call it that. He describes it as an entity, but I continue with my term. I say, how do you feel when it's there? What happens? He says, I don't know, you just kind of feel off, almost like you're being hunted, and you'll know when that thing is there. You feel like you're being watched. I've had it times where I could look up between two trees and there was something staring at me through them. As I locked eyes, my vision would go blurry and there it would be, that horrible skeleton looking thing. Apparently too, sometimes it would appear with more of a horse head, which actually sounded more scary to me. Whenever you actually got to where it was before, there was also a bad smell allegedly. The thing that I wasn't too scared about though is that apparently it never actually harmed anyone or anything. Well, at least that's what I thought. Apparently, they had a pet dog there before which everybody loved. It was a really nice Labrador and it would roam the land freely. However, one night, the dog didn't come back and they start to panic a little bit. They think, oh god, what if this dog has actually gone into the river and drowned? Then one of the neighbours actually reported seeing something by it, and the description sounded like our dog or an animal very similar to it. So worried, we decide to head over and see what's wrong, my grandfather says. When they get there, they can only describe a scene out of a horror film. Apparently the dog was there, but it was entirely drained of blood, and there were some bite marks near its neck. I don't know what kind of creature could have possibly done that. I just knew that it was one that I did absolutely not want to encounter now or at any point in the future. So what did you do, Grandpa? I buried it, very deep in the ground. He said weirdly though, no flowers seemed to grow around there, or plants, or anything, not even moss. I now feel a little more unsettled and I start to sweat a little bit as I'm uncomfortable in my chair. I actually felt quite stressed out by hearing that. I can see by the look in my grandpa's face that he wishes that he didn't tell me that and I was probably too young to hear it. He says, now son, listen to me. Don't be scared to go out of there. Haven't seen it for years. It could have been anything. I mean, that was kind of a back in my day thing. Now you're probably safe out there. Yeah, great, I thought. I could not stop thinking about this thing. The problem was too, like I said, this is back in the day when that you can only really research things through libraries or actually seeing them and experiencing things. But again, I'm not going to go to the library. And why not explore? For a couple of weeks I actually refused to go out through the forest, but eventually the curiosity and inquisitive part of me took over, so I head out once more. I'm going down a trail and walking down quite a steep incline. My grandpa was supposed to repair stairs here, but he hasn't. Well, kind of more like board decking, but it's quite annoying really. I eventually make it down and I get my white shoes very dirty. I'm just going to wash them off in the lake later on though, I think. Now, as I continue down doing my exploring, I'm pretty convinced nothing is going to happen when I see something odd. I can see a hand moving behind a tree. It's a very white hand too at that. It almost looked impossibly white. Then the clouds move behind the sun and I can see that it's kind of like a dark yellow colour. That's odd. It looks extremely skinny. I thought maybe it was some kind of animal. It kind of looked more like a chicken leg, I guess, than anything, but I didn't dare get closer to it as I saw one of the thumbs moving. I'm now not sure if what I was looking at was some kind of caterpillar or something similar to that, as I'd start to make my slow retreat to get away from it. I think it's weird. Just as this happens, that weird static starts to pick up in the air again and I can taste a metallic thing in my mouth. I don't know what it is, but I have a cold sweat now, and I quickly head back to my grandpa's. I decided not to say what had happened because I wasn't likely to be allowed out again if I said that I've gone off exploring on my own without telling anyone. My excuse for going out there was something much different, so I knew it wouldn't necessarily sit well if they'd found out what had actually happened. So now, I just go to bed, but I can't stop thinking of it. There was just something odd about it. I had no idea what I'd seen at that time, and that part of me was eating me up. So I decided to do another adventure. Now this is the following day. I go to the exact spot where the hand is, and while I'm walking there, I can't get the possibilities out of my head. I wish I had somebody else there with me to go exploring with, but I think my grandpa's going to be annoyed if I tell him. He was also doing some work on the cars now. He'd actually made me promise him before that I wouldn't go out there too far on my own, and I made a promise and I wasn't going to break that because it would upset him. I was being brave though. I was just hoping I wouldn't end up like the dog. Now I make it to the exact tree where I saw the hand, and weirdly, some of the ground below it seems to have died. It's almost like you've got all these perfectly healthy trees everywhere, but suddenly, on this specific one, just where the hand was, it seems like it's just dead, like loose bark, and also the ground doesn't have any plants which seem to be surviving. I do check a couple of times to make sure that this is actually the exact same tree, and it turns out that it is, which again is super weird for me. I'm not sure what to think of it. I decide to explore further and further. Now I do this for quite a long time, because eventually the sun starts to set, and I now realise that it's time for me to get back. That's when I noticed something strange that I didn't before. There's some kind of pile of sticks in the ground that wasn't there before. I initially thought it was my grandpa making some kind of bonfire or something, so I'm actually more confident and happy in this moment. I'm expecting to see him and to go and say hello to him, and to have a little explore around together. Well, I get closer and closer and I realise that something is quite odd actually. It seems like this little pile is not sticks, they're bones. Now I don't know where these bones could have possibly come from. I go to pick one up, but I'm froze there for a second. Something just felt odd, and I have that strange feeling coming over me again. Like something is odd, and something bad might be about to happen. Now it sounds very similar to what my grandpa described, with the feelings of everything. And I notice this is strange. The pile was probably about 2 feet tall, and I thought that was extremely weird. I then head back. I don't get too far back when I hear some kind of language spoke. I thought maybe it was somebody from a foreign place, but it sounds different. It's almost like very loud, deep sounds in a quick succession which then stop, and some kind of growling type sound. I'm froze there trying to see where this is coming from, and I just cannot find it. Now, I decide to turn away from this. I don't want to scare myself. It's getting dark and I'm not far away from getting in trouble with my grandpa and my grandma and my parents, and I don't want to have to suffer the consequences of that. So I continue bounding along until I'm halfway back. I don't hear the sounds again, but I think this is rather odd. Then, as I'm halfway back, I see something from behind a tree, which I can't describe. Somebody steps out, who I'd have to describe as about 7 feet tall, wearing a very flowing gown. And I look up, and I can see dark holes where eyes are supposed to be, and I see the face of a skeleton, and something animated moving around with it. It's not moving normally, it's kind of dancing, zigzagging from side to side, almost like it's glitching for a second. I say, huh? I say grandpa, thinking that it's him somehow, but it isn't. I look around and everything seems so dark, and it sounds like a storm's about to pick up. I'm froze there for a while, as this thing seems to slowly edge towards me. It's very hard to tell what direction that it's actually going in, because it kind of moves backwards before it goes forward. I decide to walk further down. I'm actually closer to home this way to see if this thing's following me, and it seems to. I was honestly awestruck by this. I didn't immediately connect the dots of what I was seeing to what my grandpa had described before, and other members of my family, but I moved down a bit further now. This thing was moving extremely slow. I mean, probably like quarter of my walking speed. For a good 5 or 10 minutes, I kept changing directions to see if this thing would stop following me, but it wasn't. It was getting closer and I didn't realise it at first, until I can see more and more detail. This thing looked just like the Reaper, just as I thought, and now the cards all fell on me at once. I scream and start running, and just like in your dreams, I seem to run extremely slow. I don't know where this was actually, I still don't to this day, but my legs were probably so scared that I couldn't run with any kind of pace whatsoever. So I'm left there trying desperately to get away from this thing, going slow as anything, and I seem to be not going much quicker myself. I heard snapping sounds now too. They're very loud, almost like gunshots, but it sounded like something was snapping in half constantly. I eventually make it back towards where my grandparents' house is. I was absolutely covered in sweat, and my grandma finds me there and says, "God, did you go swimming?" I say no, and I can't let out the words. I eventually get back in, and she punishes me and tells me off for going swimming in the lake. I get told to bath off quickly, and that I better explain to my grandpa why I was swimming out there. I'm stuck in the bath, literally shivering. It was a hot bath too. That's how scared I was. When I saw my grandpa, I actually didn't have the heart to tell him what I was doing and what I saw. It wasn't until months later that I could actually reveal what happened and why I wouldn't go out of the house and why I was so scared that night. He then looks at me and says, "I know what you saw, son, just please don't go out there again." And I agreed. I never did. Eventually I got older and completely forgot about the experience. That was until I had a bad dream which reminded me of it. I don't actually believe the Reaper's a real thing, but I don't know how else to describe what I saw that day. I want you guys to let me know what you think it could have been. I don't know if my incidents were isolated too, but I'm really having nightmares about it again and I want them to stop. I want to get closure to this. Now, the following is a series of weird things that happened to me that I truly can't explain. Now, what annoys me most about this is that I've tried to tell people my experience and they kind of just laugh it off. Actually, I told one of my colleagues at work today. I work as a Forest Server fire patrol person, but when I told them my story, they kind of just laughed at me and said, "Oh yeah, is that really what happened?" And that really annoys me. And this is supposed to be someone that's quite similar and that I'd actually consider a friend there, and also had weird experiences before, so I just don't get it. People are so eager to hear what you say, but then they're so happy and quick to dismiss everything. I just don't get it. But let's dive into my story and hopefully at least a few of you will understand. Now, emotionally, I wasn't really the same after this. I don't know why. I'm not a spiritual person and I don't really believe in religion much, but this kind of made me think about what else is really out there. Where I live, there can be lots of snow all the time, but I love to go on my little adventures, and there was a forest that was supposedly haunted near where I lived. Now, I'd heard quite a few things about this place, and apparently you'll hear screams in the night, you'll see headless people wandering around, and I guess just the works really. Now, I'd actually been here on 2 occasions before. One was when I drove out with one of my friends, but to be honest, it was just the biggest waste of time. I mean, literally nothing happened. We were driving for a long time to get there, and basically nothing happened, and we just get bored and come back. So I wasn't expecting too much in the second time that I'd been there. Again, nothing had happened, but in more recent times, I'd moved much closer and thought, why not go? Also, there was quite a nice snowfall, so I thought this was pretty cool. I really like going on adventures at night time like this, especially when the elements are involved. For whatever reason, it kind of makes me feel almost like I'm in a movie, especially if I've got my AirPods with me and I just listen to songs, and it really creates a vibe. I always found it empowering, but yeah. So I set out at night and I walked towards the forest off of the main path, and it's really dark. The stars are looking absolutely beautiful above me, and luckily there's no cars coming, so I just get off and straight into where the forest starts. There was probably about 30 meters of snow or whatnot before it actually starts. Then you're hit by lots of trees. Now I turn my flashlight on and suddenly I can see really well. I had a really powerful one that was actually adapted for cameras and stuff. I was actually joking with one of my friends, it's like turning on the daytime and there's nothing to be scared of. And I also said that this probably scares away the spirits more than anything. They probably think it's God. I think of these jokes as I can see my breath in front of me from the cold. Now, it's kind of like the snow that's fallen quite quickly to the ground, almost like it's kind of sleet, but it's not. It's still snowing. I notice it as I take my first steps into the forest. I have some pretty skinny trees on either side of me when I see something that looks odd. I can see what appears to be a white silhouette to my left when suddenly it vanishes. I'm a little confused by this, but suddenly I realise that it must be my breath from where I've got my scarf and things. I think it's a little odd and I tell myself just to relax a bit, and I keep walking. The trees are kind of like overarching here and it actually looks really beautiful. I do notice one odd thing. There seems to be footprints that lead off from the main trail, but they kind of look like hoof shapes. I thought maybe some kind of animal went through here, or God knows what. It couldn't have been horse riding because the branches are actually too low. To give you an idea, they're probably about 8 feet above me or dropping down to 5, so you'd have to duck sometimes. Now these aren't nice branches too. They're the kinds that come snagged on each other, and if you make one loose it's going to kind of whip you in the face. And I didn't want to lose my eyes. But it wasn't too much of an issue really. So when I set off, I didn't really have a direction or place that I wanted to go to. I heard there was an old church that used to be here, and I thought, you know what, that would be pretty cool if I can find that. Who knows what would happen if I go there on my own. Now at the time I was certain no other people around because I literally can't hear anything or see anyone. A really good telling sign is the fact that there's no lights. You kind of need lights to see where you're going out here, but I literally couldn't see any. Every so often I look off into the woods and I don't see anything. I did notice one or two strange sounds, but they didn't happen too frequently. I know that there's lots of animals out here because of my normal line of work, and just I guess from having some good sense about my surroundings, so I didn't let it put me off. I knew I had to be careful of certain animals out here because I guess some could hunt at night, but I was going to be far bigger and they wouldn't dare go to me. The sky almost looks like a beautiful orangey colour above me because of my torch, and I think that's really pretty. I do start to feel the cold a bit now, so decide to pick up the pace. Another interesting thing is there's lots and lots of footprints on this path which have been here earlier, and I think that's a little bit bizarre because usually people don't hum here too often. I'm very used to going out here and there's no one around, so that was interesting. As I'm walking, the snow's now going directly into my face and it actually made it a bit annoying, to be honest. I stop for a moment to try and figure out the direction of it so I can try and avoid it when I hear a howling off. Now I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but there seems to be another little trail where you can cut through going off of the main path, but I decide not to follow it just in case. I was kind of expecting to run into some crazy dog walker or something, but they never showed up, so I think this is a little bit odd. Eventually I come up to one of the trail signs and I can see some of the wildlife that lives here, and I think to myself, well, there's definitely nothing that's going to hunt me, as it's just birds and things like that. But I do wonder what the sound is that I heard. Now, I go a little bit further along and eventually the snow picks up even more now. It felt a little bit different and almost like the weather had become more hostile now. Again, I'm not a spiritual person, but it almost started to feel a bit more like the air was different here. Now, the only way I can describe what I was seeing if you haven't been in the woods at night in the snow is everything sort of looks like an infinite dream. It's almost like somebody's made an unlimited map of just forest, snow, woods, and it's just going to keep on going forever. You do have to be careful out here though, because if you really go off the path, then you don't want to be stuck out in the cold like this. As you can imagine, trying to get a fire going is not easy at the best of times, let alone here. As I'm thinking of this, I hear sounds up above again. I can hear somebody scurrying through the tree line. Well, at least that's what I think it is. And I pause for a second, and I go to switch my flashlight with one that has more of a focus beam. And I kid you not, as this is happening, I can see what appears to be a really small kind of lanky armed person scurrying through the woods. And I take a moment to figure out what this is. I quickly flicker on my other light, which is more powerful, and I don't see anything, so I just put it down to my mind going a little bit loose. I do have to say, I've never seen anything like this, and I think this is really weird. Annoyingly, my eyes didn't adjust well enough in the darkness to actually see this thing, and I have tried telling this part to some other people, but again, they all just say, oh yeah, it's just a rabbit. But I mean, come on, I've seen rabbits, and this thing had lanky arms. I can only describe it as if a person was about 3 feet tall, had a very large torso, and very long skinny arms that dragged the floor. But I don't know where they've gone. I tried looking around for more footprints, but I can't see anything, and this gives me a little bit of adrenaline to pick up the pace. I knew I'd gone out here hoping to find some ghosts and things, but now I wasn't so sure if I actually wanted to find them or not. Now again, I can see a mist form just in front of me, then slowly disappear again. It was a white mist, and it's really like somebody's just breathed in front of me and then vanished. I try and replicate how I was standing a few moments ago and pace backwards and start breathing more heavily to see if it was me, but there's nothing there. Pretty confused at this point, but I decided to just pick up the pace more. Now, I had one other scary experience before from being out in the woods I can think of now, but this was more to do with an animal than anything supernatural. I remember I'd gone somewhere and a big old moose appeared and it was extremely close to me. For whatever reason, it didn't really take notice of me, it just looked at me for a second, but I remember that scared me. But that feeling that I had was kind of beginning to loom over me, and I started to wonder if maybe there was a large animal like that around. Now this is when I noticed the first strange structure. It's something that I hadn't realised before. It's a large wooden structure that looks like 3 trees, kind of in a Stonehenge shape, but a little bit less spread out. This is really weird. It's like they've been carved by hand and placed upright. And what was really bizarre is that there isn't much snow in the middle. It seems like the ground is staying particularly dry here, and not snow forming. Now, I think this is really bizarre because, well, where I am, there shouldn't be anything like this. I would have been aware of it too, and I don't understand why I'd never noticed it before. It now becomes apparent that I'm not actually on the main path. I switch off my flashlight once more, and I just take a few seconds to take in everything. I'm trying to give my eyes some time to adjust to the darkness, and I look down at my battery. It's dropped down to 40% on the main flashlight thing, and that's a bit of a worry. Batteries drain pretty quick in the cold, and now I notice that there's more of the mist forming up ahead of me. I actually take a second just to assess what this actually is, but I can't figure out what it is. It's almost like a group of people standing there, kind of just like breathing or talking normally, but there's no one around, and it only seems to be spawning in a specific spot. Now, I once more get closer and try and figure out what this is, but I just can't. Now, it reminds me of a story of what one of my other Fire Ranger friends had told me about. Sorry to go off topic, but I think it's important because it might have been linked to what I saw. Now, one of my good friends had been working in the service for quite a number of years, and he would always try and prank us and pretend there was scary things out there. We never believed him, and sometimes he would actually get us with Halloween masks and stuff, and that was pretty creepy. But I remember one day that he come up to us and he looked very freaked out. He said, "Guys, I saw something and I don't know what it is." We ask him to elaborate, and he refuses for a while, but because I'm good friends with him, eventually he decides to tell me what he saw. Apparently, he thought he saw a fire, so he went over to investigate it. Apparently it was just a small red cherry glow, but that could be the start of something. Just as he got to where it was, it suddenly went out, and there was a very big mist that appeared, which is like a smoky white colour. It almost looked like there was a huge fire in terms of the amount of smoke, but nothing was burning. He said it stayed here for literally 3 or 4 minutes as he stared at this bewildered, until eventually it just vanishes. Now, the reason that I'm telling you this is because it was incredibly similar to what I saw in terms of how he described it, the way that it moved, the slight opaqueness of it, everything was just weird. I stood there for what must have been about a good 4 minutes before eventually I decided that, yeah, I'm probably going to have to press through this now. I couldn't be waiting around here all day, and I decided to be brave and walk through it. I actually held my breath just before I did so because I didn't know if it was maybe some kind of dangerous chemical or something that had leaked out, but there wasn't anything. I eventually make it through after what felt like ages, to be honest, and I was actually gasping for breath. It probably took me a good 20 seconds to get through this. Eventually when I do, I turn around to try and figure out where it had gone, and I can't see it. I do think that I can see something just moving off into the distance, but I can't be sure. It was almost like a group of people had vanished, but one of them had just went off into the woods. Now, I'm a little bit freaked out, but again, I was here alone, so there's not really too much I can think of this. Now, I do notice something else very weird. There seems to be lots of really bizarre shaped footprints going off in different directions. They're all kind of like the hoof shaped, like the thing I'd seen earlier, but they're really far spread apart, like something quite tall had been walking. But it's walking as though that it's in complete arrogance to the trees that are there, like they don't exist. And again, I don't know what kind of animal could have done this. Now I walk on. I haven't really got a direction this time. I just know that I need to keep going. I have a feeling that I'm in a bad spot, and that's when I see something. This time I was certain that I was seeing something that was actually there. It was very far away, but I can only describe this as something which is completely black, with these white tusk arm things that was about 4 feet tall that hops around. I only saw this for a couple of seconds and it vanishes, but it's probably the scariest part of the encounter for me. I don't want to describe it as like a demonic thing because again I'm not spiritual, but I don't really know what this was. It's like a really weird creature that would stand awkwardly and almost like it was just bent out too far and shouldn't be balanced, but it was. I flash on both the lights at the same time searching for it, but again I don't see anything. I then realise that I'm not too far from a lake that I'm actually familiar with, and that's when I noticed a strange glow coming from the other side of it. Now, it was kind of like a glow of like a power plant would give, I guess, in the horizon. Almost like heat waves of light just emanating out slowly, again in the white colour, but almost having more of an energy to it. I decide that I have to investigate. Now, I was actually stupidly close to the shoreline now, because one slip, one twisted ankle and I could go through the ice and no one would get me here. I'd die of hypothermia before rescuers could find me, but the sense of adventure had taken over. I turn my light around again, and I can't see anything. For a second, I'm sure I can make out the faint glow of 2 eyes, but I don't know if this is just an animal, so I'm not too worried. There's also strange sounds coming from over where the light is, and it's almost like lots of people talking played backwards, really far off, really far, like barely audible, but I could hear it. The forest was pretty quiet at this time, and I think it made it worse. I'm constantly flashing around with my lights, trying to just get whatever this is to show up more, but I can't see anything. Now, I know some people are asking me why wasn't I more scared of that weird thing I'd seen, and to be honest, I can't tell you that. It was almost like I was drawn into something, and a mixed personality had taken over where I was seeing weird things and they weren't welcoming, but they weren't worrying for whatever reason, like I had to go on further. I decided that I need to keep up my pace now, but I have some pretty good thoughts and I think, well, I don't want to fall in the water and die, so I go off now. At this part, the trees are a lot thicker than before, and that was a bit more reassuring. But that lake, I'm constantly hearing sounds from over where that lake is, and I just cannot for the life of me figure out what they are. I actually can't remember the sounds too well, and I don't know if it was because I was in a bit of a heightened state during the experience, but I just remember there were weird sounds, like scratching and things like that. Now I know it could have easily been a group of people on drugs or God knows what, but given the weather conditions, I think that's extremely unlikely. Again, this is something one of my incredible colleagues told me that that's what this could have been, and joking that it was green men and aliens, but I don't understand it, because again, these people are so interested to hear what I was saying, and maybe they're denying it because they're scared of what I'm telling them, or just refused to believe it, but that annoyed me. And I've always been somebody who has the ability to break down the physics of things. If something has happened, I don't immediately go to the irrational explanation. I think with a scientific mind, but it failed me this day, because I can't come up with much for what was happening to me. Now I continue on as the snow gets a little bit thicker now. I think the reason for this might have been because there weren't as many thin trees blocking out all of the snow to capture it. Just quite a few big ones with more space in between, but it did actually make my legs hurt. I noticed my knees are quite cold, so my remedy for this is once again to pick up the pace. I clear some of the snow that's actually settled on me, and I actually feel a bit better now. There's quite a big drop off down to the lake now, and I realise that I'm going uphill. What was weird though is that I haven't been to this area before, and I can't really find it. Even since I've been back to the forest again, I've never been able to find this exact spot. Now, it was like somebody had described the area that I was in to somebody else, and they'd tried to make it but not done it exactly the same. And you kind of know deep down that you're not in exactly the same place, but there's enough familiarity for you to feel confident in the situation. Now, as I get closer to the light that I could see, I realised that this definitely isn't the moonlight, because it was kind of flickering like it had an electrical energy to it, and was kind of flashing around into the clouds a little bit. Not like lightning, but kind of like the northern lights, and that was what I find really bizarre. Just the whole energy of whatever this was is like nothing that I've ever seen before. A little bit scared now, I start to slowly pan around trying to see anything, but I can't find a thing. Every so often I hear sounds of movement behind me, but I can't be sure what this is. I decide that I just need to keep it moving, and that was one of the things that made me feel more safe in this situation now. I eventually come up onto the bend and I start approaching towards where the light is directly now. Now again, I'm not too scared or shy of adventures, so I have to keep pressing forward one step at a time. I do notice something odd, and that's that there aren't any steps up here. I know people might not have gone here in the daytime, but it does seem weird because there was just so many earlier that I'd seen pretty much everywhere. The snow had actually slowed down a little bit, and it wasn't as abrasive on my face, and this was quite nice. My nose and toes always seemed to suffer, especially in the cold, along with my hands. I think I have a problem where they don't have very good blood, or they just seem to switch off in the cold, but it made the going a little bit tough and less comfortable. Now, had I found the ghost that I was looking for? Not just yet. So I decide that I need to go towards the light. But again, the way that the light is kind of bouncing off the clouds, almost like it's the northern lights, was just really strange. I was incredibly drawn into this, almost like I was looking at a hypnotist's watch. It was incredibly beautiful, but just really weird. I didn't know if it was related to an electrical storm, but it wouldn't really make sense for me. I have seen something bizarre while working on the service, so again, a little bit similar to this. I remembered one time that I was working. I was actually in the station and I just made myself a coffee. I went to step outside and had a look around at the sky at night just because it's so beautiful, and I do notice something odd. There's almost like a large blue electrical ball of light in the sky. It's opaque and not really visible, and it only lasted for a few seconds, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. A few of my colleagues had actually reported seeing it as well while on duty at the exact same time that I did. And this kind of had the same characteristics, but it wasn't identical. But I want to find out what this is, and I wasn't as scared as I was before. Now the closer I get, there's something else I notice which is pretty bizarre, and that's that the sky seems to be kind of imitating this very loosely. It's almost like somebody turned on a pulse of electricity through the clouds above me. It's almost like the northern lights are above the whole sky now, but extremely faint, but the same colour as the clouds, so again, it's almost like they were pulsating a bit. I did get scared because there's a eye condition that someone in my family has, which is actually a little bit similar to this, but I've been tested for it multiple times since and after this event, and it's always come up clear. But in the moment, I was pretty scared because I really worry about having issues with my vision. Now, luckily it turned out it wasn't my eyes, and I quickly did some tests by looking at the ground and things that weren't moving to realise that nothing was off. But why was the sky moving? I wasn't so sure what was happening, but I wasn't that far away now from where I needed to be. That's when I noticed another wooden structure. It's similar to what I've seen before, but it kind of formed more of a hexagon type of shape. Every so often I would see these on either sides of the trail, and they seemed to be increasing in frequency as I got closer to the light. I only saw about 3 more of them, but again, never seen it since. I stop for a moment, and I can see my breath on my light as I take my mask down just to try and get a better feel of what was happening. I shine the torch around, but again, I don't see much of anything. Don't know what I was expecting to see. I've just got the glow dead ahead of me now, and I know I have to get there. It's not much longer now before I'm there, so at least I've got that to look forward to, and I can eventually start heading back. I'm not sure how far I'd actually come at this point, but I've probably been walking for about a good 50 or 60 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but usually you'll feel it more than I was in this situation, because walking in the snow is actually really difficult sometimes, and the cold can kind of zap out all of your energy. Now, I'm not too far away from where this is, and I can hear the voices again. It sounds like whispering. I can make out the odd word or two, but nothing seems to be in a language that I understand. It's definitely in a language though, and it hasn't increased in volume or anything since when I first heard it earlier. I don't know if it was there the whole time because I kind of just zoned out to it, but I suddenly noticed it much more than I had done earlier. And again, this is pretty weird to me because, like I said, I've never heard anything like it, and it was a bit creepy. Now, I eventually come up to the last clearing where the light should be, and I'm quite excited to get here. There seems to be lots of footsteps here everywhere, so I'm pretty convinced that I've made it back onto the main path now. I've got a good feeling now, and I know that there must be somebody there, so I feel pretty happy. So, what do? Take my steps around it. I can definitely hear the voices on the right side of me now, and I keep stopping every couple of seconds to approximate exactly where it is. Every so often I see movement up ahead of me, and I'm convinced that it's people out here now, so I feel much more relaxed and reassured. I'm now going down the last straight part that I have to go to, with the trees kind of forming an arch above me, and the snow still everywhere around me. Now, some people have asked me why did I keep going and what was I actually doing out there. That was my friends at work earlier, and I don't know. I guess it kind of felt like I'd been there for too long and I was at least going to get something out of it, and yeah. So, I continue up and I eventually find where the clearing is, and I realise that I've only got about another 20 feet of a walk to figure out what this is, and I can see movement again. I decide that the best thing to do in this situation is just to slowly sneak up on who or whatever it is up ahead of me. Now yes, I've got them, I think. I can see some more lights ahead too. I'd see 2, then 3, then they go out. I don't have my light on at this point because I want the element of surprise. The snow is coming against me, but not directly in my face, so this is pretty pleasant. Now, I come up to where I can hear the voices finally getting louder and louder, and my excitement is growing. It feels like I've been here for too long trying to figure out what is actually going on, and I'm gonna get my taste of it soon. I am kind of looking over my shoulder every so often though, because I do hear sounds like I'm being followed. Again, I keep thinking I'm seeing movement, but there's not much of anything when I focus, so I try not to think of it. I don't actually have my torch on now, so I can't verify the fact that there's nothing there. But again, I just presumed it was people. And I thought, well, they haven't said anything to me, and I'm not disturbing them, so why are they going to be annoyed at me? It was almost like an overconfidence, and eventually, I come up to the tree line and the clearing. I start going a lot slower now as I get closer and closer to where I can hear them all. Now the chanting is still illegible, and I take my first step up, and I look around and I can see what must be hundreds of people all standing around the edge of some kind of clearing. They've all got their hands raised up and they're making some weird chanting sound. Now they're not actually that close to me, so it's pretty difficult to make out how tall they are, but these things seem really small. I say things because I don't know if they were people unless they were on their knees, but that's what it looked like. I start to shake a little bit as I feel a lot more like I'm in danger now. I decide that I'm gonna slowly turn my flashlight on for a second and figure out what this actually is. My eyes adjust more and more to the darkness every couple of seconds, and I notice something wrong. They don't look like normal people. The shape of them's all wrong and their arms are too long, and they're all either wearing some white things on their arms, but it looks very pointy, just like the things I'd seen earlier. I try as best I can to slowly flicker on the torch, but I cannot do it. Again, I start shaking more and more and try and press it, but nothing happens. I keep on and on flicking until eventually it flashes on, and for a split second I can see these things. They're like very dark small creatures with weird pointy arms, all facing up to the sky making some weird sounds. Their mouths are what really scare me. It's like just a circle with lots of jagged teeth. And just as I'm taking this all in, they suddenly vanish, and so does the sounds. I quickly fire the torch around everywhere trying to see where they've gone, but I can't see anything. I can hear my heartbeat in my ears like a constant rhythmic drum. And then, a few moments later, I hear movement, rustling and the sounds as though hundreds of people are all coming towards me suddenly, and I take off. I turn my torch on and quickly dart up ahead of myself, constantly looking over my shoulder with the torch. What I have just seen, I don't know, but I knew that I was in danger and had to get out of there. Luckily, I can retrace my footprints for most of the journey until I get away from the clearing. I can hear the sounds are still coming after me, just much slower than me, but they're still coming. I stop for a second and fire the torch around everywhere but can't see anything, and I drop it. Now, I managed to drop it not only into the snow, but face first, and that also means there's no light illuminating back at me, it's kind of buried. Just as I say to myself, you've got to be kidding me, I can hear something else not far up ahead of me. So I take off. Thank God I actually brought the other torch with me, because I'm absolutely certain at the fact that I would have had cardiac arrest otherwise. Now, the only problem I've got is the other torch isn't that easily accessible right now. I put it away when I was trying to hide and be not heard, but now I'm starting to think that wasn't really a good idea. And because I've had this on and so close to my face, I haven't really adjusted to the dark, and I don't know where I'm going. I used to be quite good at long distance cross country, so I have that in my favour, but I soon realise those years are way behind me, and I come up to a point where there's two paths. One's much smaller and seems untrodden but should be closer to where I need to get to. The other is what seems to be closer to where the light is, and I have to choose the latter. Now I take off down this path, and I keep fumbling trying to get the other torch on, but for whatever reason I just can't seem to do it. I don't know if it was for the fact that it was in the cold for too long, but in those moments it just would not come back to life again, and I'm just hitting it on my palm constantly. Now it's extremely difficult to navigate in this moment. I think I know where I'm going, but I can't really tell. There's clearly lots and lots of different footprints on this path, and I can't tell if they're normal or not because I was rushing so much, but it gives me some reassurance that I must be going in a relatively good direction to escape whatever this is. Now I should mention at this point that the sounds are long gone. I'd absolutely blitzed something that seemed like it couldn't go much quicker than a light walking pace, but it didn't matter. I don't know what was chasing me or why. I don't know what I'd just disturbed. Eventually, I flick my torch on again, and I illuminate the rest of the way back. I turn it off again quickly because I'm not sure how good the battery is and I really needed to conserve it. I stop for a few moments to collect my breath and look around me, and I think I know my bearings now, and I start to walk. The only reason that I had to walk now is because I was so out of breath and exhausted from moving in the snow that I genuinely was going to have to crawl the rest of the way out otherwise. I now make it up to another clearing where I can see the lake. I look around everywhere, and what's really weird, I can't see the light glow that I saw earlier. It's genuinely nowhere. I was convinced that I should still at least be able to see that out of all things, but there's literally nothing. I don't get it. And the sky, it still didn't look right, but it wasn't like before. So where did the light go? I didn't have much time to focus on it, but I was truly perplexed, and this is something that I still think about now. I managed to get my torch on again, and I don't know, it sounds stupid, but I was trying to recharge whatever energy it was and fire it around everywhere, hoping to see the light again, just to know it was there. But again, I don't see anything. Now, I'm pretty spooked out now, but I have to keep going. I eventually make it into a more familiar area, and I'm actually feeling confident finally. I've adopted more of a walking pace because I was a little bit worried that if anyone was out there and I ran up on them, they might think I was trying to attack them. I do stop constantly though, and look around, desperately trying to see something or anything around me, but again, I can't see anything or anyone. I was desperately hoping that I'd see a group of people just to explain what I'd seen, or at least to be able to tell somebody, but I can't see anything. The snow's picked up a little bit more now, and it wasn't pleasant. I realised too that I must have been out of here for quite a long while because the battery is virtually entirely drained on the torch. I know because it's gone pretty dim. I probably have the worst torch in the world because when the battery is low it goes really dim to conserve it, but it doesn't last very long, so what's the point? The other light that I have is far superior, but that's long gone. I decide to leave it for whatever's out there to enjoy it. I know I'm never seeing that thing again. I'm someone who usually hates losing things too, but I was so scared I didn't even think about trying to recover it. Now, the trees are getting thinner and thinner, and that gives me a pretty good idea that I'm not too far away from where I need to be now. I can't be 100% certain that I'm back to safety, but this is a pretty good indicator of it being the case. Now, I continue this walking pace, and I'm constantly looking behind myself. Now, momentarily, I start shaking again and don't know why. Then suddenly, I realise I hear something making a screeching sound. It's kind of at a medium volume, but it sounds like it's coming from exactly behind where I was. I'm not so worried now because with a few steps, I'm eventually back to where the forest ends and I'm not too far from safety. I look around for anything to have been following me, but I can't see anything. And I quickly make my way over to my car. I start it up, turn the lights on full, and take one last look into the forest, and I can't see anything. I get back into my car and drive the rest of the way home, completely in shock about the whole experience. Now, I really don't know what happened to me that day, and I truly don't like sharing my story with colleagues at work because they don't really listen to me, but I know what I saw, and I don't know what it was. It could have been spiritual, it could have been anything, but I sure as hell don't have a clue what that was, and that scares me. Okay, so it's been a while, but I've decided it's finally time for me to share my experience with everyone. I currently work as a Forest Service worker. I'd done this for not too many years, and something jogged my memory recently. This is something that happened when I was much younger, and is something that I've not really been able to forget. It was I and a group of friends who decided to explore a cabin which had been long abandoned in a forested area close to where we all lived. We were all excited to go there. There were rumours that there was more than meets the eye there. We basically were convinced that it was haunted and that we're going to find all kinds of ghosts and things there. You know, just typical things to get teenage boys excited about exploring, so we head out. As we head out, it had been raining recently, and our parents told us not to get dirty. I actually had a big umbrella, so I was pretty happy. I knew too that I could probably utilise this as some kind of weapon if I really needed. So we're heading out into the forest, and it has a really cool vibe to it. We're pretty sure where this thing is, and we're excited to go. There was the odd leaves falling down, and it wasn't too far away from Halloween, so we were definitely ready to be spooked out. It's funny saying that in hindsight. So we start walking when suddenly a man appears on the path up ahead. He looks pretty weird with a long white beard. He's saying things but kind of stopping every few seconds. Nobody understands what he wants, but he looks really weird. He suddenly locks eyes with me and for some reason just won't stop staring at me. I find this especially weird, and I felt like I was almost caught in a trance while making eye contact with this weirdo. I tell him to leave me alone. Eventually though, he walks off into the stream, literally into the water going uphill. I don't know how he was able to do so, but he literally just takes off, and that was the last we ever saw of him. We look at each other and decide to start jogging a bit. The thing is, we don't know who this person is or why he's out here, but he's definitely weird. Maybe it's some kind of guy that likes to live off the land or something, who knows. But we left him to go his separate way to us. I felt pretty good at the time. I felt like this is it. This is what we wanted. Everything's coming together suddenly, and this is the moment that we've been waiting for. We start to make up some things and imagine that he's probably come from the cabin that we're heading to. We eventually see the cabin, and that thing looked scary. It was almost like it had just been planted in the middle of nowhere. This is long before we had mobile phones or any good way to communicate with our parents, so you really felt the desolation of the area. Especially because, well, we lived in a pretty remote area to begin with, but if you go into the forest, there's all kinds of crazy things out here. We had regular sightings of Bigfoots and UFOs, you know, all the good stuff. But this thing felt different. We bravely start making our way towards the cabin. Apparently there's another group of friends who one of the people I'm with knows, and said allegedly if you go there on your own at night, crazy things will happen to you. The ghosts will try and kill you. As he said that, my friend made me jump and it annoyed me. But we pressed forward and eventually get to the cabin. There was no door to worry about. We ended up heading in, and I can see a way down to a cellar. Now this is interesting. This wasn't on the script. We knew there was more to this place, but none of us expected to find something like that so early. So that was definitely an interesting moment for us. We have a look around and there doesn't seem to be anybody else present. That's when we realise it. We call him Steve. Crazy Steve has appeared again. He seems to have a pan on his head too, which was really weird. We think, God, does he live here? Is he cooking? But he can't be, the place is abandoned. He's just watching from behind a rock, saying all kinds of gibberish, but clearly in our direction. You know the homeless guy who ends up in the freezer on The Simpsons? Well, it kind of looked like him. He's wearing actually similar clothes, which is quite funny thinking of it now. He doesn't seem to be getting any closer though, so we decide to investigate a bit more. I know this probably isn't smart or wise to turn your back on an absolute weirdo living out there, but he seems to be relatively harmless. I can't stop thinking about that basement though. What could be in there? It was definitely odd. So we wait in here for a little while, and we realise that Steve's got a bit closer now. He's moved even further along to a rock. He always seems to hide behind these big rocks or trees, like he knows what he's doing to not be seen by us. Yeah, I'm getting more and more freaked out now, and we decide that we should probably go back. Now we've decided to start picking up the pace a little bit. We've started running now to try and get away from him. At first he doesn't do anything. Then a loud thud happens and I'm forced to look behind myself. There he is, throwing something towards us. It's a pan. We can hear more gibberish in a very loud and dark tone, and we can hear pat pat pat. He's chasing after us. My God, was he quick. One of my friends screams out, how can this old guy be so quick? Honestly, it was almost inhuman the pace that he set. He was gaining on us, and all of us were pretty healthy and should have had much more pace on him, but we don't seem to in that moment, and it's really frustrating. We start running as fast as we possibly can, desperate to get away from this weirdo. Eventually we make it out of the forest and we seem to have lost him. What the heck was that? We all say, as we're all entirely dumbfounded as to who that was and why he was chasing us. We eventually get back home safely and not too much else happens, but something was stuck in my mind. I just couldn't forget about that guy in that cabin. I don't know why, and that led me to a few years later, when I was in the area on my own. When I got a bit older, I got into the habit of going for night walks in that place. I'd long forgotten about that guy for the meantime, and I felt pretty safe out there. I was going for one of my night jogs actually on this specific occasion, one where I was my typical indecisive self, and I couldn't decide whether to jog or walk, so I did both periodically. And would you know, there's a cabin up ahead. It looks so nice, so inviting and enticing. And there's the thunder. A storm was brewing. It just felt too perfect and excellent to be out there. I suddenly got buckets of energy from who knows where, and I decided that it's my time to investigate alone. I wanted to know what was in that basement. Nobody had told me this stuff before, and the adrenaline and excitement was taking over for me. I take a moment to look around and I think, Steve, I hope you're not here now. As I go in and I say sorry, almost as though I was acknowledging in my head that what I was about to do wasn't smart, but I was going to do it anyway. So off I go, towards the cabin. Every footstep I take, I can feel my heart beating quicker and quicker as I get closer and closer to this cabin. And what do you know? The next moment I'm in there. Yes, it's just like I remember. It's almost like every room that I look into is another part of nostalgia for me as I feel more and more excited seeing it. You know what? I'm going to come back here with all my buddies. We've got to do this again and explore. And then I see it. The path with stairs. And I can't help but go into it. So I do so, and I go up initially, then I go down, deeper and deeper. This place is huge. Something falls next to me and I can hear almost an echo, a reverberation. Wow, this is cool. I then realise that it goes on quite far, and I want to see how far this thing actually goes. So off I go. There's quite a large concrete wall to my left, then a small tunnel which goes off to the right next to it. I actually have a flashlight with me, so I flick it on for a second. I tied it onto my sweatband that I'm wearing, and I've got pretty good visibility. I had to put my sweatband the wrong way, kind of having it vertically on my head, but it does the job perfectly. I was almost like a surgeon or mechanic now, operating with true precision. So I start making my way along when suddenly I see a drop up ahead of me. I slowly feel around the sides of it, and it doesn't seem too large. I can see the bottom for a second with my flashlight, and would you know, the thing falls off. It knocks itself out along with the battery at the same time, and I can't find it, so I go to turn back, and then I feel warmth up my arm, and suddenly a pulse. It's my pulse. I'm grabbed and almost fall headfirst into the tunnel, but I stop myself and scream. Something is gripping onto me. I reach down and feel a hand, a human arm. I cannot seem to loosen this thing's grip until I smash it as hard as I can. I actually miss and really hurt my hand hitting the side at first, but I'm able to get free. I don't hear anything after that, and I scurry back screaming. I'm screaming every few seconds while I catch my breath and eventually make my way back up the stairs again. I start running, and I can't really see clear. I realise now that lots of dust and things have kicked into my eyes, and I say, how can this happen? It can't get worse for me. I can't see where I'm going, but luckily, I know the area well, as I run through some of the forestry. It seems like the forest is closing in on me as I get closer and closer to escaping. I kept up a beautiful pace and eventually make it to the border of the woods. I start screaming over and over again, not knowing what on earth happened to me. Was it Steve? Did he finally come back to get me? I don't know. I eventually make it home quickly, and I tell my parents about what's happened, and my dad insists on calling the cops or going back there himself, but my mum says no, just leave it, it's probably just some weird homeless person out there. I then vowed to myself and my parents that I'm never going to go back there again, and you know what? I didn't. I never found out why that happened or who it was. I don't know what made me think of it again so much recently, but I just want the answers, but at the same time I don't. My grandfather was a park service ranger, and he would always tell me these stories. Apparently, on the plot of land that he owned, there was some kind of weird figure that would appear every so often. Now, you couldn't ask him exactly what it was and get necessarily a clear answer, because it would change from time to time. He basically wasn't sure exactly what it was, and each time he would describe it different, usually using the different emotions of which he felt while spotting it. Exactly the same thing would happen with my grandma. Sometimes it was like this thing was angry, sometimes it was like it was hurting, sometimes it was like it was lonely, and sometimes it was like it was lost. But one thing was sure, they always reported seeing it, and it actually gone back to their parents and grandparents. Now apparently there was some kind of ancient burial site upon this land, and I didn't know about it until I got older. But allegedly, there have been multiple sightings of something tall, skeletal in appearance, which apparently would roam the land randomly. The first time of which it was sighted was near the small river and the lake that's on the back of their property. Apparently, it was seen virtually hovering across the water by my great-grandpa. Apparently he was hunting one day and stopped for a while to rest by it when he saw this thing. Apparently it scared him so much that he actually tried to fire shots at it. He said either he had the worst aim in the world that day, or that thing was some kind of spirit and the shots were going through it. He didn't know. He was so scared that he actually left his gun there. It was out of ammo by that point, but he wanted to get away as quick as possible and not necessarily carry any dead weight whatsoever. The next time it was spotted was by his wife a few years later. Apparently she was out trying to pick wild berries on their property one day when she could see a skeletal head staring at her from behind a tree. At first she thought it was some kind of animal that had died there many years ago and they hadn't realised, but then she said the thing moved. So weird sightings actually come from their guests too, and not only them. Even all the way up to my grandpa. Apparently my grandpa first realised it was there when he was there during one Christmas. And apparently he was out playing with some of the other kids and he noticed a strange gown. He said this time it was red in colour, which was weird because usually it appears as black. At first he thought it was a tree, or at least the stump of a tree, of which was different colour to the rest of the woods, until he realised it was moving and he can see a face. The way that he describes it, now God bless him, he doesn't have much knowledge of Star Wars, but he said it looked like one of the characters with 4 lightsabers. I can't remember the specific name, but you know the one when it's got its hood up, but if it was red. From the sounds of that story, I was pretty creeped out by my grandpa, but then he says there was more. Apparently, there was another time that he was playing with his friends, and he actually saw multiple of this thing. Weirdly, apparently it also had glowing orange eyes. That's how he noticed there was more than one. He can't say for absolute certain because it was quite dark at this time, but he's pretty convinced it was, and they weren't isolated incidents. Now, I actually spent a lot of time out of there. I ended up spending quite a lot of time to just get away from my parents. At least that's what I think they were doing. My grandparents had a lot of time to look after me, so I was often there. My memory of my grandparents was absolutely loving. Like, I honestly couldn't have asked for better grandparents who were more loving or caring. It's something I don't think I really appreciated so much when I was young, actually, because they were kind of always there. So it's something that I kind of got a better appreciation for and grasp as when they weren't here, which I always regretted. But anyway, so I remember taking some walks there during the summertime when I was a bit younger. I've grown up with these stories pretty much all my life, so probably about 8 or 9 out of 10 times that I'd actually go out there, I was half expecting to have some kind of horrifying encounter. Though it never really happened. I actually went out there multiple times with an overactive imagination, really wishing that something would happen to me. The stupidest thing I ever did was I actually called for it a few times. Now, I don't know why I actually did this, but again, nothing would happen. I remembered one specific day though when I was out there seemed to be some kind of haze up ahead. It was almost like there was a big filter and there was some kind of fog which wasn't there before suddenly over part of the scenery. I do think to myself that this is particularly weird. It's something I haven't seen before and my young mind can't comprehend it. I had a really weird feeling too, and strangely there was some kind of static in the air which was making the fibres on my jumper stand up and also the hair on my arms and the hair on my head. I looked up scared there was going to be a lightning strike. I've been told about them before. This was before you had the videos to watch on the internet, but I was aware of it. I think maybe they told me in school about it one day, but I digress. I did look up and there was no rain clouds whatsoever. So I think this is specifically weird. It's almost like I'd walked into some kind of electrical storm, of which there was no storm, just the electrical aspects of it. So this was a deeply weird moment. I kind of felt uncomfortable. I've looked up the feeling later on in life and it's similar to what those experience when they're in the vicinity of infrasound. Just a deep unhappiness and feeling that something is off, where your mind and body can't comprehend what's happening. I remembered walking around for a while. I kind of wanted to see the Reaper thing. Every time I said the word Reaper, my grandpa would say, no, no, that's not it, no. But that's how I described it, and that's how it sounded. So yeah, I was looking for this thing constantly, but nothing would happen, so I headed back. I think this was really odd. I remembered when I got home, my grandparents asked what was wrong with my hair, and I said, I don't know, some kind of storm. They both looked at each other and my grandpa laughed. He knew there wasn't a storm. It was really nice and sunny outside. He thought I was just messing around or something, or had wore one of his hats and not said. He actually brought this up and I said, no, no, I'm serious. That's what it was. He then laughs and we go about our day. I constantly pester him though to learn more and more about the Reaper. He tells me not to call it that. He describes it as an entity, but I continue with my term. I say, how do you feel when it's there? What happens? He says, I don't know, you just kind of feel off, almost like you're being hunted, and you'll know when that thing is there. You feel like you're being watched. I've had it times where I could look up between two trees, and there was something staring at me through them. As I locked eyes, my vision would go blurry, and there it would be, that horrible skeleton-looking thing. Apparently too, sometimes it would appear with more of a horse head, which actually sounded more scary to me. Whenever you actually got to where it was before, there was also a bad smell allegedly. The thing that I wasn't too scared about though is that apparently it never actually harmed anyone or anything. Well, at least that's what I thought. Apparently, they had a pet dog there before which everybody loved. It was a really nice Labrador and it would roam the land freely. However, one night, the dog didn't come back and they start to panic a little bit. They think, oh god, what if this dog has actually gone into the river and drowned? Then one of the neighbours actually reported seeing something by it, and the description sounded like our dog or an animal very similar to it. So worried, we decide to head over and see what's wrong, my grandfather says. When they get there, they can only describe a scene out of a horror film. Apparently the dog was there, but it was entirely drained of blood, and there were some bite marks near its neck. I don't know what kind of creature could have possibly done that. I just knew that it was one that I did absolutely not want to encounter, now or at any point in the future. So what did you do, Grandpa? I buried it, very deep in the ground. He said weirdly though, no flowers seemed to grow around there, or plants, or anything, not even moss. I now feel a little more unsettled and I start to sweat a little bit as I'm uncomfortable in my chair. I actually felt quite stressed out by hearing that. I can see by the look in my grandpa's face that he wishes that he didn't tell me that, and I was probably too young to hear it. He says, now son, listen to me. Don't be scared to go out of there. Haven't seen it for years, it could have been anything. I mean, that was kind of a back in my day thing. Now you're probably safe out there. Yeah, great, I thought. I could not stop thinking about this thing. The problem was too, like I said, this is back in the day when that you can only really research things through libraries or actually seeing them and experiencing things. But again, I'm not going to go to the library. And why not explore? For a couple of weeks I actually refused to go out through the forest, but eventually the curiosity and inquisitive part of me took over, so I head out once more. I'm going down a trail and walking down quite a steep incline. My grandpa was supposed to repair stairs here, but he hasn't. Well, kind of more like board decking, but it's quite annoying really. I eventually make it down and I get my white shoes very dirty. I'm just going to wash them off in the lake later on though, I think. Now, as I continue down doing my exploring, I'm pretty convinced nothing is going to happen when I see something odd. I can see a hand moving behind a tree. It's a very white hand too at that. It almost looked impossibly white. Then the clouds move behind the sun and I can see that it's kind of like a dark yellow colour. That's odd. It looks extremely skinny. I thought maybe it was some kind of animal. It kind of looked more like a chicken leg, I guess, than anything, but I didn't dare get closer to it as I saw one of the thumbs moving. I'm now not sure if what I was looking at was some kind of caterpillar or something similar to that, as I start to make my slow retreat to get away from it. I think it's weird. Just as this happens, that weird static starts to pick up in the air again, and I can taste a metallic thing in my mouth. I don't know what it is, but I have a cold sweat now, and I quickly head back to my grandpa's. I decided not to say what had happened, because I wasn't likely to be allowed out again if I said that I've gone off exploring on my own without telling anyone. My excuse for going out there was something much different, so I knew it wouldn't necessarily sit well if they'd found out what had actually happened. So now, I just go to bed. But I can't stop thinking of it. There was just something odd about it. I had no idea what I'd seen at that time, and that part of me was eating me up. So I decided to do another adventure. Now this is the following day. I go to the exact spot where the hand is, and while I'm walking there, I can't get the possibilities out of my head. I wish I had somebody else there with me to go exploring with, but I think my grandpa's going to be annoyed if I tell him. He was also doing some work on the cars now. He'd actually made me promise him before that I wouldn't go out there too far on my own, and I made a promise and I wasn't going to break that, because it would upset him. I was being brave though. I was just hoping I wouldn't end up like the dog. Now I make it to the exact tree where I saw the hand, and weirdly, some of the ground below it seems to have died. It's almost like you've got all these perfectly healthy trees everywhere, but suddenly, on this specific one, just where the hand was, it seems like it's just dead, like loose bark, and also the ground doesn't have any plants which seem to be surviving. I do check a couple of times to make sure that this is actually the exact same tree, and it turns out that it is, which again is super weird for me. I'm not sure what to think of it. I decide to explore further and further. Now I do this for quite a long time, because eventually the sun starts to set, and I now realise that it's time for me to get back. That's when I noticed something strange that I didn't before. There's some kind of pile of sticks in the ground that wasn't there before. I initially thought it was my grandpa making some kind of bonfire or something, so I'm actually more confident and happy in this moment. I'm expecting to see him and to go and say hello to him, and to have a little explore around together. Well, I get closer and closer and I realise that something is quite odd actually. It seems like this little pile is not sticks, they're bones. Now I don't know where these bones could have possibly come from. I go to pick one up, but I'm froze there for a second. Something just felt odd, and I have that strange feeling coming over me again. Like something is odd, and something bad might be about to happen. Now it sounds very similar to what my grandpa described, with the feelings of everything. And I notice this is strange. The pile was probably about 2 feet tall, and I thought that was extremely weird. I then head back. I don't get too far back when I hear some kind of language spoke. I thought maybe it was somebody from a foreign place, but it sounds different. It's almost like very loud deep sounds in a quick succession which then stop, and some kind of growling type sound. I'm froze there trying to see where this is coming from, and I just cannot find it. Now, I decide to turn away from this. I don't want to scare myself. It's getting dark and I'm not far away from getting in trouble with my grandpa and my grandma and my parents, and I don't want to have to suffer the consequences of that. So I continue bounding along until I'm halfway back. I don't hear the sounds again, but I think this is rather odd. Then, as I'm halfway back, I see something from behind a tree, which I can't describe. Somebody steps out who I'd have to describe as about 7 feet tall, wearing a very flowing gown. And I look up, and I can see dark holes where eyes are supposed to be, and I see the face of a skeleton, and something animated moving around with it. It's not moving normally, it's kind of dancing, zigzagging from side to side, almost like it's glitching for a second. I say, huh? I say Grandpa, thinking that it's him somehow, but it isn't. I look around and everything seems so dark, and it sounds like a storm's about to pick up. I'm froze there for a while, as this thing seems to slowly edge towards me. It's very hard to tell what direction that it's actually going in, because it kind of moves backwards before it goes forward. I decide to walk further down. I'm actually closer to home this way to see if this thing's following me, and it seems to. I was honestly awestruck by this. I didn't immediately connect the dots of what I was seeing to what my grandpa had described before, and other members of my family, but I moved down a bit further now. This thing was moving extremely slow. I mean, probably like quarter of my walking speed. For a good 5 or 10 minutes, I kept changing directions to see if this thing would stop following me, but it wasn't. It was getting closer and I didn't realise it at first, until I can see more and more detail. This thing looked just like the Reaper, just as I thought, and now the cards all fell on me at once. I scream and start running, and just like in your dreams, I seem to run extremely slow. I don't know why this was actually, I still don't to this day, but my legs were probably so scared that I couldn't run with any kind of pace whatsoever. So I'm left there trying desperately to get away from this thing, going slow as anything, and I seem to be not going much quicker myself. I heard snapping sounds now too. They're very loud, almost like gunshots, but it sounded like something was snapping in half constantly. I eventually make it back towards where my grandparents' house is. I was absolutely covered in sweat, and my grandma finds me there and says, "God, did you go swimming?" I say no, and I can't let out the words. I eventually get back in, and she punishes me and tells me off for going swimming in the lake. I get told to bath off quickly, and that I better explain to my grandpa why I was swimming out there. I'm stuck in the bath, literally shivering. It was a hot bath too. That's how scared I was. When I saw my grandpa, I actually didn't have the heart to tell him what I was doing and what I saw. It wasn't until months later that I could actually reveal what happened and why I wouldn't go out of the house and why I was so scared that night. He then looks at me and says, "I know what you saw, son, just please don't go out there again." And I agreed. I never did. Eventually I got older and completely forgot about the experience. That was until I had a bad dream which reminded me of it. I don't actually believe the Reaper's a real thing, but I don't know how else to describe what I saw that day. I want you guys to let me know what you think it could have been. I don't know if my incidents were isolated too, but I'm really having nightmares about it again and I want them to stop. I want to get closure to this. My father is a park ranger, and even when he was off duty, he still liked to take me on trips out into the great wilderness. We went to quite a few different national parks, but something that I'd like to share with you is a rather strange experience that we had while we went on one camping trip during the summer. Now, we were planning to be out here for about 4 days, and this is during the summer break. It meant that a lot of different places were very busy, but my father, having the career that he did, knew one that would be a very quiet place we could go to, and I was all up for it. At the time, I was doing okay in school, but I didn't really know what I wanted really. At the time, I was pretty sure I was going to end up in the military, but it didn't happen for a few reasons. But because of this at the time, my dad thought it would be a good idea to take me out into the woods just to get accustomed to being outside. It made a lot of sense, and obviously you're going to spend time camping out if you're in the military, so it was a pretty good idea, we thought. I did have some summer school things that I needed to do which were coming up, and I really didn't want to do them. I don't know, the idea of summer school just never really made sense to me. The way that I'd look at it is that you're on summer vacation for a reason, and you shouldn't have to do more things in between. I think it should be a time that you can really rest and recover, but my mum didn't think so. Again, I think my dad understood this, and that's why he was quite willing to take me on a nice trip I could enjoy. There's a number of different things we had planned for this particular trip. Now, on the first day we set out just for a nice hike to see the views. We had all of our camping gear with us in some old military rucksack things, my dad carrying the most. Now, during the first day, we saw a couple of people around, but I realised that the further we went, the less and less they would become. Now, this is a good thing for me because I kind of wanted to escape people a bit. It was a really good experience, and I had a good time bonding with my father over this. Now, eventually it gets closer to nightfall, and we decide that we're going to try some night fishing. It's something that I haven't done before, so I'm quite excited to do so. We eventually make it to the campground that my dad had picked out for us, so I'm pretty happy to be there and put the stuff down. My dad shows me where we can do the fishing and sets up everything and gives me a headlamp. Now, while this is happening, I haven't really done fishing before, so I'm pretty much at a loss as to how exactly I'm supposed to do this. So every 5 minutes that I haven't caught anything, I put my headlamp closer to the water looking for the fish, obviously scaring them off, and I constantly move my fishing reel around thinking that's going to make a difference, but again, it probably just scares them off. I don't know. I was more worried about hurting my hand on the fishing reel. My dad seems to be gone for quite a while though, but it doesn't really bother me at the time because I'm too caught up in trying to do the fishing. While fishing, I can hear some water disturbance. It's not close, but I definitely notice it, and I face my head up, trying to shine my lamp towards it, but obviously I can't see that far. The torch isn't that powerful. Now, I can just about make out the silhouette of something in the water before it disappears down again, and I think, wow, that must have been a really big fish. Now, something strange that happened while doing so is, out of my peripheral vision, I realised that a plant has just moved, like somebody's gone over and touched it. Now again, there's no one around but myself and my dad, and I know it's not my dad, so I'm a little bit unsettled by this. Now, I do think maybe it was just some kind of animal, so I don't think too much of it. I try and cast my fishing reel as far out as I can now. I just about do so, and my dad eventually arrives and says, "Godson, you know you took me out with that. You have to be careful," and shows me how to do it properly. And my dad's actually doing fishing properly. We didn't eventually find anything, but he tells me not to shine the light down because it scares the fish and that you kind of want to stay still. I tell him that I'm sure there was a large fish that disturbed the waters further up, but he tells me the fish shouldn't be big enough to really do that, because I said it was similar to a person, but I think my dad dismisses this. Now it starts to get quite cold, so we head back to our campsite and settle in for the night. And it's a pretty good night. My dad was reading a book and I wasn't really sure what to do with myself, so I just started drawing some things. It's something I'd done when I was a lot younger. I don't actually do drawing anymore, but I'm pretty good at kind of like the cartoon sketches for some reason. I guess I used to draw The Simpsons and SpongeBob or something like that, but I think that's the reason that I have kind of a knack for it. And my dad was pretty impressed with my drawings. I just drew some of the forest and tried to draw the thing that I'd seen in the water earlier. Well, not necessarily the thing, but the way the water was disturbed and the plant moving. It felt like the right thing to do at the time. And that was that. We eventually fall asleep and wake up for the next day. Now on the second day, we weren't actually leaving this spot, and we were just going to do some more hiking around. My dad took me to one place, and my god did it have a beautiful view there. Everything looked so pristine and beautiful, and at the time it cemented into my mind that I wanted to be a military person, because I thought, well, I'm just going to be seeing things like this all the time, and for that I was incredibly excited. Now my grandfather and his grandfather are in the military. We're kind of from a military family, so I thought it was going to be good to follow suit. Now, eventually this day comes to a close and nothing too much happened. The following morning we pack up and we're ready to go on to the last part of this, get into the last campsite, the third one. Now, the hiking to get to this one wasn't too bad really, and again, I was pretty pleased to go out there. I don't know why, I just felt good the whole time, and it was a lovely experience. Now, we get to the campground eventually and settle in for the night, and this is when things get a bit weird. I'm awoken by the sight of somebody outside the tent. I can just about see the silhouette. I say, "Dad," and then realise he's not there, and I quickly unzip the tent. I can see my dad holding the hunting knife and torch in the other, pointing at someone. I say, "Dad, Dad," and he says to stay still, son, and my dad screams at somebody to get back now. Because of how bright it is, and obviously I've just come out of the dark tent, my eyes haven't adjusted, but I quickly go and grab my headlamp and turn that on, and I can see somebody covered in blood there holding a knife, just staring at me and my dad. Now, what was really crazy is what happened next. He turns round, throws himself into a tree, then gets up again, and repeats the process. He stares at us for probably 10 seconds before going up to the exact same tree near our campsite, throwing himself at it, then coming back again. I realise that he's dropped a knife and constantly picks it up, and he hasn't cut himself, and the blood and stuff is just from the tree. But what on earth is he doing? Now, this gone on for a good 10 minutes before my dad tells me to start packing up everything. I quickly do so, and I didn't feel too scared in this moment because having my dad there with his knife made me feel like the safest person in the world. Now, we eventually get all of our stuff together, and I kid you not, the whole time this guy was constantly doing this same thing over and over again. I've never seen anything like it, and not even to this day I haven't. We eventually get our stuff together, and my dad tells me to hold his hand and to lead the way back. Now, this is a big responsibility at the time because I haven't really been camping like this before, and I'm not certain I know the way back, but my dad tells me that he's not going to look back until this guy's out of sight. Now, I do constantly glance back, and my dad tells me not to because he can see when I'm doing it because of the light, and he knows how scared I can get sometimes. But I asked my dad what's happening, and he said that the guy's constantly doing this same thing over and over again, until eventually we're at a point where my dad can take over and tells me to do the same. My dad's walking incredibly quick, and eventually we make it back. My dad quickly makes a call to the police and reports what's happening. I'm confused as heck, and eventually we get back into the car and drive home. Now, it turns out that what happened, and this is something I only learned after my dad told me after a number of years, is that the police found that guy there. Apparently, he had stabbed somebody and then taken some kind of mushroom that gives you a repetitive motion syndrome or whatever it's called. And that's why he was throwing himself at the tree. Apparently he was completely out of his mind, but they managed to capture him. Now, if it wasn't for that mushroom making him repeat his motions, he could have easily continued to progress towards us and probably just stabbed us in our tent. But thank God he didn't. I'd like to give you a little bit of context before that I get on with my part of the story. Now, this was a really weird time in my life. I was in my mid-20s and everything was going really well. I mean, my career was going excellently. It took me a long while to get into this position, but I was really happy for it. And I don't know, everything just seemed like it couldn't get much better. I'd married someone that I was really happy to be with, and interestingly, my family members didn't actually all know about this. It was basically a secret wedding we had, and we were going to have another one up in the future as a more formal one, but we couldn't end up getting that far. Basically, one day when I was at my parents' house with my wife, she just turns to me when my parents have gone away and said, "Oh, by the way, I don't think we can stay married together. Since I've married you, it's really felt as though that my life has changed for the worse, and that I've become almost that stereotypical wife. And while saving for a house, I never wanted to do that, even though it's a thing she'd agreed to do with me, which I thought was really odd. Now, she also said that, oh, by the way, we've also got to change where we live too, which is something that really surprised me. Because, of course, the marriage thing was pretty hard to deal with, but living away too, that was going to be even harder. I knew for a fact that I absolutely did not want to go back to my parents, because where they live, it's basically miles away from everything. And one of the nicest things that happened to me was moving out with her and just getting away from everything. But now I was faced with living with strangers, which is something I'm not really that keen on. And also losing my wife and becoming alone once again. Ah yes, my old friend loneliness. Well, I say that kind of retrospectively because it's not, but you'll find out more about that later, so yeah. Anyway, I was also about to start a new job, and literally I was only 2 days past renewing the rent contract with my wife for another year. So yeah, you can imagine how much it sucked. And the job that I was about to go into was not an easy one at all. It's not your typical job, it's quite a high pressured one. But it's something I'd been excited about for months, so I'd gone from basically counting down the days to instead feeling pretty confused about everything. It was my last day at work not too long ago, and I don't know, it just kind of felt like a surreal moment. Just everyone was coming up and hugging me, it was great, and instead of it being a beautiful moment, it turned out to be quite the opposite. It was a pretty weird feeling for me. I mean, I don't really know how to describe it, but yeah, that's that. And now at the moment, I live with my wife, and she goes out every so often and does whatever. But there's another part of this too I forgot to mention. She went for a trip away one day, and I questioned if she'd actually gone alone, and she said, oh yeah, I have, but in truthfulness, she hadn't. Turned out I checked her phone, and she had cheated on me and been meeting up with some other guy. The worst thing was, this was a guy that I met once. Yeah, my situation sucked and I wasn't happy, that's all I can say. So now, basically, I don't really know what to do. I'm going around seeing the odd friends here and there, but the problem is, very few of them actually understand me, and I can feel more alone being around people that don't have any empathy for my situation. Not in the sense that they have to care, but I don't like it when they just can't understand and they just immediately start talking about themselves and their own things, kind of oblivious to what's going on or what's right for me. Also, there's a few others I know too where they won't actually care about me, they'll just try and get me to do the things that they want to do because, you know, they don't want to do it alone. But it kind of leaves you in this weird limbo land, I guess is what you'd call it. You're doing everything right, but it feels like nothing's going right around you. And there's some other things too that are kind of ticking you off. I mean, it's important not to give in to temptations and stay on the straight and narrow, but my god, does that become difficult sometimes. So that was my predicament which I was in, and I wanted to kind of get away from people. Where I live is in a major city and there's always too many people around. I always have my habit of doing my night walks with my music, but the problem is there's constantly too many people around and I just can't get left alone, it feels like. Even if I'm talking to one of my friends on the phone, there will always be somebody who seems to come up to me asking for directions or something. Completely arrogant to the fact that I'm talking to others, so yes, that leaves me with the escape plan. So I want to get back into nature and just get back to where I guess people can't hurt me. Nothing can hurt me really, but I'm being a bit melodramatic here, but you kind of get the point. There is the weaker thoughts and feelings of which are really trying to take over now, but I'm not letting them. I've been down and you can't take me there again, that's my mindset. So I set off on one particular day when I booked the day off work. I actually had the day off planned already to enjoy it. I did think I was going to enjoy it with my wife, or should I say ex-wife, but hey, here I was. So I start walking into the forest at around midday. Things are pretty okay. I'm just basically lost in my thoughts but trying not to be. I usually distract myself with music and whatnot, but this time I decided that I don't really think I should be doing that. I could probably spend my time better just trying to stay in my head and actually retrain my thoughts. Because of course my thoughts are quite negative at the minute and I don't want to fall victim to that. So I decided to go without music or anything. Another thing that I probably should have done is brought more water, but I didn't really think of this at the time. I probably filed for divorce about 4 days ago, and yeah, it was a really weird feeling. The thing I didn't like is the fact that I knew I'm pretty much stuck with this person that I can't stand for at least the next month for the time that I'm getting settled into my new job. And every time I see her, it just reminds me of all the things that I didn't like of which happened. And I'm trying my best to remain civil. I'm trying my best to turn off the savage, the voice that bubbles up in my head every so often, but it was really difficult. And I was kind of failing, like, I don't know, it's a weird loss feeling. I control my breathing though every so often, and I find that this really helps and makes a big difference for me. I'm one of those people where I can make myself win, or I can also make myself lose in my head if I'm not being too careful, so I decided to choose the winner's path. Now, I'm very glad to say that there was nobody around at this particular time. Now, I was trying to take my mind off other things too, like work commitments and other projects I needed to complete before starting the job. I mean, yeah, I could book 4 days off, including the weekend, and not really be able to enjoy it because of work commitments. I was supposed to get a raise soon, but I knew it was going to be difficult for it to come through, but I suppose everybody has those problems, don't they? I remembered when walking I kind of felt a bit fearless, which is something I haven't experienced for a few years. This one, however, was quite pleasant, and it actually come from supreme confidence. I've become an extremely confident person in the last few years, and that always serves me well. It's really weird though, it's almost like I've got most of the jigsaw complete, but not all of it. There always seems to be a piece missing for which I'm trying to put in there, but I never seem to be able to. I seem to be the great philosopher who can see what other people need to do, whereas I'm almost a stranger for myself in terms of advice or at least listening to it. A lot of what I say seems to fall onto deaf ears when I'm talking to myself, and I feel like if my walls can hear me talk, they would tell me just shut up and be quiet. But anyway, I get further and further into my walk and I do feel very sweaty. I'm somebody who does tend to sweat quite a lot. I mean, even at the best of times in winter, I have to be careful about even wearing coats which are too heavy, because very quickly I can start to sweat and just feel horrible. I do have a new special deodorant I can use, but it doesn't really work, but the sweat was bothering me. Not just because of the fact I might smell, but I knew that I'd probably sweat through the deodorant which I was wearing, so obviously it's going to be quite annoying if I still had a lot further to go and I started to sweat. No issues, I just threw my shirt off temporarily. Now as I do this, it does become apparent how many bugs and insects are around, but they never seem to bite me really. Well, at least I think that until I can't stop scratching above my neck. It was a really weird feeling. It was almost like somebody had put something on me, but I couldn't quite take it off. I'm not too worried and just keep going. I'm trying not to wipe the sweat off because I know it helps cool you down. I go further and further into the forest now, and I feel quite comfortable. This is actually in an area that I'm not too familiar with, and I suppose that it served me well. It's around springtime, and lots of the greenery has returned to the trees and the surrounding nature. There's lots of moss and other things on the trees around me. It looks really cool. I can smell more and more of the plants and wildlife, and it starts to make me feel more comfortable and almost at peace and like I'm at home kind of. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is all I needed to get the clarity in my head. I just had to go for a nice walk and get away from everything. Every so often thoughts of my ex creep into my mind because we used to do little treks like this sometimes, and I'm trying my very best not to let it bother me because it can do so easily. Every time that I have a thought of her, I let it creep again to the back of my mind, almost like a breath in and out, or waves in the ocean. Now, As I'm walking, I do have a feeling that somebody else is here and with me. I'm not a spiritual person, but I do kind of believe that everybody has like a guardian angel. I've actually seen a psychic who told me that it was my great grandma, and I do believe she is with me, and that's what I think in this particular moment. Of course, I'm not delusional, I don't expect them to fend off every evil in the world, but I do kind of like the idea of her being here looking after me, so I just presume that she's with me. Every so often I can smell a smell of perfume, and it's pretty cool. This is something that's happened before. My dad apparently is more sensitive to things like this, and I keep on smelling a nice perfume smell, and I say hey, and her name, and I smile to myself. I don't know why, I just knew that in this particular moment that she was with me, and that everything was going to be okay. Or at least that's what I keep telling myself. I now progress into a part of the forest which has kind of denser plants on the ground. The trees are always high and hard to see around, but these plants in particular seem to really be obstructing my view. I think this is okay though, and just keep pressing on further. I'm cautious not to go too far because I don't have any water with myself and I don't want to be out here alone. I just got a new mobile phone too, and I've had issues where it doesn't always get signal. Also, some of my accounts seem to go public, which I'd set private for a while, then logging in again, and I just didn't like the feeling, almost like my privacy was breached. Around a corner, and I'm taking on some slight elevation, but it's not enough to cause any issues. I decided to stop for a little while, and I have to do up my shoelaces. One of my shoes is annoying me because it's kind of cutting into my ankle a bit. I tried to undo the shoelaces a few times, but it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. I'm kind of wearing them like, you know how people wear really expensive shoes with all the laces undone, but it doesn't seem to be making a difference. I decide that each step forward I'm going to try and block out the pain, but my god, that was difficult to do. Weirdly though, every time I look at my actual ankle it seems to be in good health and as though nothing's wrong with it. Now, I continue on this walk. The perfume smells left me, and I turn around for a second and see what appears to be a hiker. They seem to be just off in the distance. They're wearing some black overalls or something and they just go behind a tree. I don't really think much of it and just think, well, I've got to pick up the pace to get away from these people now. I remembered too that I really miss seeing my brother at this point. He was aware of everything which was happening and we made a few calls, but I really wanted to see him and meet up and do things with him, but he wasn't available, and that was kind of hard to deal with. It's almost like having a best friend that lives out of state where you see each other occasionally, but the days that you really need someone there at least with you, they're not able to, but I guess that's fine. I suppose that's how life goes. I remembered stopping for a moment because I noticed that my shoelaces were dragging a bit, and that's when I realised they weren't. It was someone coming from behind. I look around for a few seconds and said, hey. I don't get a reply, so I just presume that whoever this is being extremely rude to me, so I think, well, I'm just going to press on instead. I do feel a little bit uncomfortable now for the first time. I mean, I'm not a small person. I'm over 6 feet slightly. Not really that built, but quite strong, and I know some martial arts, so yeah, I'm not too bothered. I am worried though because I don't really know where I'm going and I don't want to get too lost out here. The last couple of weeks when things have went wrong, I found that I'm not my usual calm, confident self. My mind kind of goes into a panic more easily, and I don't know, maybe that's just from not sleeping so well, or maybe it's a host of other things, but it's a really weird feeling. So a little bit panicked, I just pick up the pace, and my shirt's been on for a while now. I've still got a jumper which is wrapped around me, and to be honest, all it served to do is act like a radiator, so I'm walking quickly away, but I also feel like I'm far too hot at the same time, which is quite a funny feeling really. I then realised stupidly that I still have my bottle of water in my jumper pocket. I can't believe I didn't realise it was here. I slam that thing within seconds and throw the bottle off somewhere. Now, the weird thing is, when I threw the bottle, I don't actually hear it hit the ground. Yeah, it was a plastic one, but it still had a tiny bit of water left, so it should have had some weight or something. I have a weird habit of not downing all of the water completely for some reason. I know it's stupid. But yeah, I don't hear the bottle whatsoever, and I'm a little put off by this. That's when I hear it. It's kind of like a laughing sound. Now, I've heard foxes before and other animals, and it kind of sounds just like those. I thought, God, if I didn't know what this was, I'd actually be quite scared at the minute. I am becoming a little bit paranoid. I kind of feel like I've done something wrong, and that I shouldn't be out here like this, but I don't know, it's almost like something took over me. I end up going up a bit further, and eventually I find some ledges to sit on, and I'm just staring off at the trees now. I kind of forget about my situation and relax a little bit, and I remember looking at the light coming through the leaves and thinking, well, I suppose life is kind of beautiful, and it just depends how that you actually look at everything. I thought, I sure wish I had someone here to enjoy this with, and my mind starts to drift backwards again, which is quite annoying. I'm now thinking once again of the things that have gone wrong recently, and it's kind of stabbing at me quite a lot. So I keep going and pick myself up again. My eyes seem to be more fixated up this time, and I am a little bit worried about whatever the sound was behind me, but it soon stops. Now, I get a little bit further down the trail when I hear something that I can't really explain. I hear somebody call out, which almost sounds exactly like my name in a male voice. I think this is really weird, and I decide that I must keep going. But I can't figure out where they are, or who it actually is. I half think that I've run into somebody that I knew, but I knew realistically that was really unlikely. Especially because of the time of day of which this occurred, so I think this is odd. And that's when I see it. There's a person who looks like they've got to certainly be homeless not too far away, wearing all black, kind of looking at me saying, hey, stop, hey. This person was actually quite tall, and I don't know, they had a really weird look in their eyes. It almost looked like their eyes are far too pale. I can't tell when their clothes are from, but it doesn't look like it's in the last couple of years. I say, no, sorry, I've got to go, and I just turn and start walking quickly. Almost military, I keep repeating to myself, watch your six, as I'm walking away from who or whatever this person is. I'm looking over my shoulder every so often, but I'm trying to do that confident walk. You know, the ones that you're kind of taught to do. Well, not really formally taught, but you know you have to look confident to not look like a victim. Yeah, I was doing one of those. I was in such a weird headspace though that I was kind of happy about everything that was happening around me. Not in the sense of this situation, but I wasn't put off by the situation. I've been in some rough situations here and there, but this one felt a little bit different. Maybe it's because of last week's events, but I wasn't worried about what happened, what didn't happen. I didn't even feel like fighting if it come to it. I don't know, I just felt weird. I look around and I can't see the person, but I can hear some movement on one side of the trees. It kind of sets in a bit now that I'm in a situation I don't want to be, and I guess panic took over, and I feel my heart beat quicker and quicker. Now, it's at a point where that I'm still walking normally, but it almost feels like there's another force inside my body. I keep telling myself, stay calm and watch your six, and every so often I look behind myself, but the person isn't there. This gone on for probably another 20 minutes until eventually I stop to catch my breath. Now, I can continue going on further, but I realise that it's probably going to become dark, and I 100% don't want to be stuck out here with whatever this is. Now, kind of tapping into my bad situation, I become a bit fearless and just turn right around. I kind of march forward a bit like a train. I don't actually know why I did this. Again, I think it was just frustration of my situation and not really being bothered with what was going on anymore. I think, God, if this is really my time, then so be it. I can't be bothered now. And I just start marching forward. I do this for about, let's say 2 or 3 minutes until my adrenaline settles down a bit and I start to feel more tired. I kind of have the feeling like when you run in a dream, but not exactly. I've always had some injury on my leg and it's really annoying. Or not always, probably in the last 5 years, but pretty much whenever I do certain kinds of exercise, my leg can really ache for ages afterwards, and I was a bit frustrated because the feeling comes back. I thought, well, I can probably make it out of here, but I'm probably going to get injured in the process, and again I get more annoyed. I can then hear movement again, and I now realise that the person isn't far away. Initially I stop to listen to where they are, and I hear them swear. Then I hear another voice swearing too, not far off. I don't know exactly what they were saying, but I was thoroughly creeped out at this point, and I know that I need to move. Now this really scares me. I don't know why, it was just something about knowing that there's more than one of these people that unsettled me. I then say, "What do you want from me?" One of them says, "You're going to give us everything." I don't know what that means, and I say I don't have any money. They say it doesn't matter, and I just scream, "I don't have my card, I don't have anything to give you." I was half tempted to tell them about what was actually going on in my situation, but I decide that the best thing that I can do is just keep going. For some reason, I didn't let up and sprint now. I used to actually be really good at running, especially long distances, but since going to the gym, I've actually got quite good at sprinting too. I got it from the sports that I used to play, but for whatever reason, I just didn't want to do it. Again, I think I was probably far too lost in all of the rubbish from within the week, but I don't sprint. I also stupidly don't look around. I'm just confidently walking away, almost like I'm in control of the situation, but obviously I'm not. That's when I feel it. Something grabs onto the back of my jumper. Within a split second, I've turned around, punched something. Turns out that I've missed what I'm trying to punch for, but whatever was holding me let go. I then pick up a full sprint within a few seconds and start screaming out some profanities. There's one particular swear word that I always say really loud, and I suppose that because I've done it so often, I've probably trained my vocal cords in it, and I do it in this situation. I ended up sprinting. I'm not sure how long that I was sprinting for, and I don't bother looking back. I keep grabbing little branches and things that are loose and throwing them behind me, hoping to deter whatever's chasing me from doing it. I'm a little bit worried though, because I think, well, a male of my size, again, I'm not saying that I'm massive, but I'm not really small, shouldn't be in a situation like this unless that these people have really bad intentions. I've already told them that I don't have any money or anything to give them, so why are they still pursuing me like dogs? Now, I probably jogged and sprinted together for about another 5 minutes before I get really angry. I turn on the spot and scream a swear word once more and say, "Come on then," like I'm ready for them. I don't hear anything now, just silence, and for whatever reason, that was the worst part of the whole situation. It now dawns on me that I'm lost out here and I have no idea where the people are pursuing me. So yeah, I just turn around and I almost accept everything. Weirdly, parts of my life start flashing through my mind, the good and the bad, and in that moment I felt lots of pride for myself for everything that I'd overcome. I start walking now and pick up the pace. Now I know for a fact that a branch didn't snag onto me because when I've looked on my jumper, I can see that there's no holes or anything, so it's definitely a person that grabbed me. I lift up my shirt and to my surprise I can actually see a bruise where who or whatever it was had tried to grab on me so hard that it's actually bruised a bit. Now I ended up power walking for probably another good 10 minutes before I eventually come to roughly where the start of the trail is. Now I take one last minute to turn around and I scream again and I say, "Come on," swearing. I think an animalistic part of my brain had finally kicked into life, and maybe it was really the fight or flight in the latter come to light. But I did feel scared though a few seconds after that. I eventually make my way a bit further up and I'm able to escape from that forest. It was such a messed up situation. I go to check my phone and of course there's no internet. I think, well, that just sums it up, doesn't it? But then I feel a sense of relief knowing that I'm out of the situation and that I don't have to worry about my phone not having internet when I'm stuck out of there. It was starting to get cold now too, which was actually really annoying. It's actually become so cold that I have to start jogging the rest of the way home, which again was so annoying for me. I could tell that my body was exhausted and I was also trying to gain weight at this time, so I knew I could say goodbye to any weight that I could have gained. Yeah, that's how I was thinking. Nothing was really coming across logically. I did think about reporting this and everything, but the more I thought of it all, I kind of realised that they were probably just homeless people, and that it probably wasn't as bad as it seemed, but I don't know. When I got home, I was faced with my partner again, and I couldn't be bothered to actually talk to her. I kind of explained briefly what had happened, but she just didn't seem to understand. I decided that I should just save the details for myself, and that she kind of didn't deserve to know almost. Now, it wasn't that long ago that this situation happened to me, and I haven't really told anyone about it, to be honest, other than you guys, but I don't know. Let me know what you think it could have been, because to be honest, I really don't know. I love to tell myself that it was probably just homeless people trying to rob me, but the thing is, I have contactless on my phone. I don't carry a bank card. I don't see the point, it's just another thing for me to lose. But I wonder what would have happened if they weren't happy with just taking my phone. Why were they out there? And why were they so quick to get aggressive and try and grab me? Yeah, it was pretty weird. I mean, I like to think that there was nothing too bad from it, but I guess there kind of was. And it does actually worry me a bit that I was so lost up in my head that I didn't consider the situation for which I put myself in, so yeah, I guess if it's kind of like a learning point for other people, just please try and always be aware of your surroundings and the situations which you're entering. Because I know when you're emotionally reacting to things, it's easy to lose sight of what's in front of you, but sometimes that can be the most important thing for a variety of reasons. I was doing trick-or-treating one night with my older brother. I felt pretty safe doing so. I was about 11 and he was about 13. To be honest, we weren't exactly at the best age to go out on our own, but our neighbourhood was relatively safe, and my parents didn't have an issue with us doing so. All is well, basically. I was dressed up as a vampire, and my brother, I don't know what he was maybe a zombie, Frankenstein, vampires, and just anything you can think of mixed together. I really wanted to get one of those scream masks. You know, the cool ones where you can pump blood in it? Well, one of my friends had one, and I was jealous, but apparently the blood would always leak everywhere, so that was annoying. Now I start off and eventually fill up my bucket pretty nicely. I remembered one funny thing happened where an older lady said, "Oh, have you not got much there?" I'm on my second bucket. I didn't explain it well and she gave me a ton of things. I then explained the situation and she already closed the door. I still laugh about it today. So, we're just about to round up for the night and go and eat our stash. Everything's good. We turn back and turn around. Now, after not too long, we notice some people dressed up further ahead with some kind of campfire. Now, being young and probably naive, we just think they're other trick-or-treaters, and we're pretty interested in what they're doing. I said to my brother, I don't know, it could be bad, but he said no, what if they're roasting marshmallows? We've got to go and join them. So that's what we do. We decide to go up there. I say that we don't have that many marshmallows, and then my brother reveals that he actually has some, which is really good. He had those giant ones, which I actually love to this day. So we start heading over there, and realised that they're quite a long way from here. We also can't hear anything too, which was interesting. They're actually quite far off into the woods. Now, my father actually worked as a police officer, and he'd given us a lot of information about stranger danger, but at the time we were not thinking of this at all. We just want to get out there. As we're making our way over there, we're dropping candy left, right and centre on the floor. I shouldn't have done it, but I guess we were too young to care. Now we probably walked about half a mile when we hear something. A very loud metal sound. It sounded like somebody dropped a big iron hammer on the ground. Weirdly, it sounded like the sound come from very close to us, which is weird. My brother then grabs my hand and says, "Quick, hide," and we hide behind a tree. What was more weird is that everybody by the campfire stops, and they look in our direction. We think this isn't a good situation, but what was the sound? We're kind of naive, but we know that we're in danger now, so decide to stay put and not move at all. This goes on for probably about 20 seconds or so, before my brother realizes something. He says, "Hey Brian, look." I say, "What?" They're coming here. They're coming towards us. Now, even though they're about 400 meters away, we were too afraid to move. I say, "What's happening? What can you see?" He says, "Shush, be quiet." And I do so. Now, it's probably the most quiet that I've ever been in my entire life during these few seconds. I can see them approaching slowly in the distance, and I don't know why they're coming here, but I feel really anxious. My palms begin to sweat and I kind of get shaky. Now weirdly, there was no sound to accompany them, so you didn't really know how close they were. They start moving through the tree line until eventually I can see something. There's one dressed in white robes, then two, then three, and they're carrying something on a stick. They're also leaking water or something on the ground, and there's two more holding the other end of it. Someone's also throwing things on the ground as they walk. I really felt like my heart had stopped while I realised that they're walking straight past me and continue on up ahead. I continue shaking now, and I become incredibly nervous. I felt like I didn't breathe too, and we slowly watch as they round a corner, and there's a disgusting smell to accompany them. After about 20 minutes, we finally decide that it's safe for us to get up, and we're all very nervous. Now, it doesn't take too long before my brother decides that we've got to get a move on here, and we start to proceed up the hill. It looks like blood on the floor and a blood trail. We actually follow this on the same path getting back until eventually it disappears into the tree line. Even writing this story, I'm starting to get the shakes again. I don't know who they were or what they were doing. I'm just thankful that we didn't have to find out. I've decided that it's now time to share my story. I don't want to be one of those people where I have lots of stories and things to tell people and share, but I never get round to it in my life. That wouldn't be a good thing. I'm kind of setting myself up to fail if I have that approach, I think, so I just get down to what's important, really. Yeah, I'm worried that I'll die and my stories will go with me. To be honest, for a long time, I didn't want to tell too many people too many of the things that I'd experienced because, you know, even if it's as plain as day, they'll say, "Oh, you're just seeing things," or "You're just trying to make out something that's not really there." It's kind of annoying, really. But yeah, I know I've not got that many years left to live. I've had a good life, and I guess one that I eventually found a lot of happiness in. So for my job, for quite a while, I actually used to have to go out and rescue people. Every so often people would wander off into the woods basically and become completely lost out in the snow, and it was my job to go and rescue them. Well, there was a few other people that we worked with in the teams, and I'd like to share some of the weird experiences that we had, and some things that I saw that I think might be interesting to you all. So let me cast you back now. We're sitting at the station and we don't have any call ups, so we go home. We are actually able to get contacted while at home though, so we knew it wasn't completely being out in the clear. I mean, basically you had to be close enough to the job that you could actually go back if you needed to actually go and make a difference with things. So I get back home and it's one of those drives where that I kind of need the time just to think clearly. You know, like the nighttime drives people do. I think I used any time that I was driving just to sit and reflect in silence. I found a lot of peace from doing this really. So yeah, that's how I was getting on with things. Now after not too long of doing this, I get back home and I feel quite happy. I get in though and realise that the heating's went off, but that doesn't matter. I can start the fire, so I quickly go outside to get some wood and things, and I start doing that. While I'm out there, I'm met by another person. I say, "Hey, how are you?" Just trying to be nice. I realise that he hasn't replied and I look up again and that person is gone. I think that's odd. I thought maybe it was a new neighbour who was just nervous about being there or something. I don't know, people get weird though sometimes. Especially when you live in a place where there aren't too many other people around. I don't know why, it's just an opportunity for some people to be quite weird, I guess. So anyway, I get the wooden things that I need and I just start cracking on. I head back inside and I start making my fire. It's quite a nice one. I go lay down in my chair and I wake up to a phone call. I open my eyes and the fire's quite big now. I'm kind of glad that I woke up. I need to tend to it and poke it back into place. The place that I live in isn't designed very well and it's probably a big fire hazard. I think today you wouldn't be allowed to design things like this, but basically if you put enough wood into the fire and it becomes big enough and you don't control it, it kind of spreads out and it's quite close to the wooden floor. I'd actually seen it melt some things before and it wasn't very good. So after doing that, I quickly go over and pick up the phone. They say, "Hey, we got something we need you guys to come back for. Can you do it?" I say, I don't know. I'm pretty exhausted at this point. I noticed that I was getting a strange feeling in my neck and feeling breathless, and it's one of the signs that I'm actually a bit exhausted. So with this in mind, I say, "Is there no one else that can do it?" I know some people are probably thinking, "Oh, that's not a kind and caring person," but honestly, if you're to do a job like this and you understand that yes, you give your life to this thing, but you also get exhausted from it. I think burnout with these kinds of jobs is very common and I was definitely feeling it that day. But they haven't got anybody else who can go out to help the team, so I kind of reluctantly agreed. So I now basically pack up all of my things and quickly put out the fire. I'm a bit anxious about putting out the fire though, to be honest. I just have a bad feeling this time. I don't know why, I just couldn't really shake it. But I get everything together and head off. I grab a newspaper because I know I'm probably going to be bored at some point during this and we're going to have breaks, so that's fine. Annoyed that I forgot my coffee, I curse a little bit but head into my truck and get going. The lighting seemed worse this time on the way back, but I put it down to the fact that I was most definitely tired at this point. I was just tired of all kinds of things really. I needed a break, but here I am, still going, still pressing forward, trying to tell myself that I'll get a break soon, but I just keep on and on getting called out and it's just not good enough. But hey, I signed the dotted line, nobody had me at a knife point doing so I go. It's probably good it is a bit of a drive for me to get there because I think this definitely helped calm me down in the process. Yeah, I needed that really. Just to be able to calm down enough to actually get out and start to do things. So yeah, I feel a bit better when I actually arrive back and we get the download. Apparently somebody is injured out there. They might even have thought that a bear attacked them or something. They had reports of screaming and then some blood trails, but that was all they knew. I think to myself, great. Is this it? Is this the end? I was jokingly thinking of this unoptimistically to myself, but there was actually some truth to the sarcasm of which overcast my mind at that moment. I felt like I was kind of spellbound to have something bad happening. Do you ever get moments in your life where you feel like everything's playing out like it's some kind of movie or something, and you're just watching it play out in front of you, and you know things are going to happen but you don't have control of it? Yeah, it's kind of like that. The next thing I knew, I was out there. I'm walking up a snowy staircase. We basically have a staircase which leads us out into the part of the forest which is designated for us, the rescue workers. It's basically from here that we can go further and further in, much further than other people are allowed to go. In fact, when you get to the end, there's a sign saying stop, turn around, no civilians. Of course, I have to ignore this and just go through, so that's what I started doing. As I closed the gate and I turned around, I could swear that there was somebody who was standing at the very far end of where I'd come from, just kind of motionless. I thought maybe it was a civilian or something. I mean, civilians could come up to this point, so I didn't have a problem with it. But I thought, oh man, I just hope that there's nobody else to get lost out here. My self-talk was pretty atrocious at this point, but there wasn't too much of which I could do in particular to change it. So here I am, off I go, into the snow. The snowfall at this point was really beautiful. I should make note of that. When there's enough wind, it kind of just dusts off the top layer of snow, and it's really a beautiful thing. It kind of looked good here. I start to relax a bit and head off in the general direction. Now the thing is, we didn't really use radios. The technology wasn't so great at the time for these, at least where we were, because of the thick trees and stuff. But I didn't have an issue with this. I knew the area well, very well. In fact, that's how we were trained back then, to become expert navigators of the landscape, so that way we could go on regardless of not knowing exactly where we were, but having bearings and landmarks with us at all times. So that was fine. So I'm heading down and the wind picks up a bit with some snow. Every so often it's like my vision goes for a second because of the snow picking up. I start to think I've got to be really careful if there is a bear out here. I actually have a rifle on my shoulder, but the thing is I hadn't really shot one for a while. I wasn't so sure I knew exactly how to use it safely, and I wasn't sure it was a high enough caliber to take out a bear. I remembered one of my other colleagues telling me that if you get into a bear situation, just shoot it between the eyes. That's okay, but what if you miss, I thought. We had the bolt action one, so that's at least a second gone there in between rounds. Then, oh no, I haven't loaded it. I quickly put a few rounds in and put the safety off. This is probably the dumbest thing I did, because I had a loaded rifle which would occasionally point towards my head, but I didn't realise this until after the fact. So I'm walking round, and every so often I can hear a weeping kind of moan. I don't know what it is. It's definitely spooky though. I thought maybe there was an injured person around. I go to call out to ask if they want help, but I don't get a reply. I go to do it again, and furthermore there's no reply. So I'm just thinking to myself, well, I don't know what's happening now. I want to call out, but I can't for some reason. It kind of feels like I'm being stalked or hunted. Yes, that's it. The feeling of being hunted now. Gosh, it's well and truly not a nice feeling to have. This goes on for a little bit longer, and I'm now walking into somewhat deeper snow. I slip down a bit, but quickly steady myself, and I think I see something moving. There's some movement in the tree line, but I can't make out exactly what it is. Then I hear it. This time it kind of sounds like thunder or something, but there's no thunder above. Odd. It's kind of like if you've ever watched one of those really old horror films, and every so often they have the thunder and lightning and whatnot, and you're thinking, oh yeah, something bad's about to happen. But that was creepy. You know what, I'm gonna say it, that was the scariest moment of my life. Constantly hearing thunder of which I could not explain whatsoever. It was almost like there should have been something, but there just wasn't. And it kept happening every so often, almost like a monster was about to jump out and get me. But it didn't happen, so I press on. I'm going a bit further along now, and every so often parallel to me, I can see snow being disturbed on some of the trees, but I can never see what's the source of this. My presumptions, of which I believe are correct potentially, are that it's a fox or some kind of animal like that. I don't know, just something. But I guess I tell myself that at the time just to try and make sense of this. But I don't know what these are. So I keep going. Then I see it. A very faint pinkish colour in the snow. It's going off of the area that I'm in, so I now make a diversion in order to follow it. I watch this for a little while, and it doesn't seem to be picking up much. Every so often it seems to be a bit more strong, but I now notice a strange yellowish colour in the snow too. So yeah, I keep going and just following this, and I realise that every so often there's a splotch of blood. Okay, that's not very good. I know something's definitely up now. I know I'm definitely getting close. The problem is, in this situation, I don't know for sure whether I'm actually hunting something or whether I'm actually finding a person. The problem is, in this kind of state of fear, you can be very likely to take shots or do things that you wouldn't in other circumstances. So I'm definitely a bit more anxious now than I probably should be. I'm just worried that I'm going to be trigger happy. I'm going to say it now, I'm probably the most trigger happy person in the world. Even if things made me jump while we're practicing on the gun range, I would always take a shot, almost an instinct. I decide to put the safety on now, and I take a round out, or two. I'm just worried that I'm just going to empty this clip and either run out of ammo or shoot a poor person who might already be injured. I've seen a car crash once, so I should be prepared for what I see, right? Well, I keep going. There was something extremely unsettling about following a blood trail like this. It almost feels like there's a picture being painted in front of you. You're basically following the breadcrumbs of some kind of monster. At least that's how I felt. I didn't notice it again until afterwards, but there's no footsteps to go with this blood. There just seems to be blood going further and further into the woods. It doesn't pick up enough though, and I'm still following it, and I've got to admit, I'm getting a bit annoyed now. I feel like, when is this thing going to show itself? Who's there? And I stop, and I can see that I'm in a cavern. I call out, hey, hearing my voice echoing off of the surrounding environment. I stop and call out, hey, once again. I'm trying my best to figure out if anybody's here. I say, hey, I know you're hurt, but I can help you. I've come here with supplies, food, everything. Just let me know you're here. I can help you. I don't hear anything, so I stop for a moment. Places like this are always quiet, but it felt awfully so now. It's strange, I oddly felt quite relaxed, almost like I was in some kind of dream. I think because I had the rifle I wasn't too worried at this point, but it was definitely odd, and now the blood trail has stopped. I haven't really got a choice though, other than just to keep checking in the area. I do know roughly where I am, but the further I go, the more loose this knowledge becomes. The thing is, literally everything looks the same here, especially in the snow, so that's not helping now. There's no footprints around now other than my own, so I know I'm definitely not where I should be, but at least with the knowledge that I'm starting from zero, I know that I can keep going and hopefully get somewhere half decent in terms of progress, so that's what I'm doing. I get further and then decide that I'm going to give up. I've come quite far now. I've searched the area that I really need to, and there's no more blood. So I head back. Why have you done that? A voice in my head says. You shouldn't have given up on somebody like that. And I start to have strange visions. I have the vision of somebody bleeding. I can see them wandering around aimlessly and just covered in blood. I think that's odd. I still can't make sense of this. It seems like they're being hunted too, which is especially weird. They're going further and further. Then I snap out of it again. I think I should really get back now. I'm somebody with a relatively over-imaginative thinking pattern at the best of times, but this was a bit creepy to me. I'm going further and further now, and eventually I get back to maybe the halfway point. I'm battling two different voices in my head now. One's telling me that you're a coward, you need to stop and go back, but the other one's telling me just go, get out of here. I then notice that there's some more blood. This time it seems much stronger, and I'm a bit concerned now. I can see the blood going up into the hill a bit further from where I am, and some blood on the trees. This is definitely from a person. I'm getting creeped out now. I grab my hand and try and will myself forward, almost imagining that there's another person there with me. So I start to progress onwards. Now crash. I hear the sound as though somebody's fallen, and I drop to one knee with my rifle in hand. I scream out, "Hey," and again I'm met with more reverberations of my voice coming back to me, the only solace I have in this moment. Now I move along, and with my hands shaking, trying to see where this all leads to. I now have some kind of flash again. My vision goes for a second, but now I can see dogs, or more like wolves, looking very angry up ahead of me. For a second I think they're real, and I realise that I'm aiming at them, but then I flash back to normal and there's nothing there. But it follows the blood. It's like my mind's trying to tell me something. Wolves. There must be wolves out here. So I start going further, and I can hear wolves. Oh no, I think I must be in a bad area now. But I press on furthermore. The blood seems pretty bad. I know that I'm about to find a dead body. I get a chill up my spine as I realise this. The wind's picked up now, and it's kind of making a bit of a haunting sound. For reasons unknown to me, my legs feel extremely heavy at this point, and I really have to force myself up. I actually start using my hands on my knees to help me go further. I look at the blood on one of the trees and it looks fresh, and you can see the distinctive marks of somebody's forefingers. Oh god. I call out, "Hey, hey," somewhat getting angry this time. I force myself to go forward, really starting to feel sick now, and I have to keep swallowing to try and stop myself from vomiting. And now another flashback, and this one's so much more powerful than all the rest. I see it. Somebody being torn apart by dogs. I realise now they're wolves. Really going at them. This is a lot of blood now, and it makes me feel sick. I go back to normal and I'm frozen. I'm just coming up to the top now, and I'm scared to look down. I kind of fall at this point. I think it was almost like I kind of stepped forward, trying to get a foot in, but not realising that the snow was quite soft and the ground was a bit further below it than I expected, and I start rolling down, tumbling now. I scream out, swearing, looking for my rifle. I punch the ground, then get up and quickly grab my gun again. I sweep it round and say, "Hey, hey," as I realise that there's more blood to my right. I turn around and that's when I see it. A body. A decomposing body in the snow. Though there's no blood around it this time. I think that's really weird. I think maybe more snow settled, so I walk towards it. I don't know why I was aiming my gun at it. I think it just made me feel a bit more safe. I kick the snow, but I can't get too close to it. I'm expecting to see some blood. Maybe there's a layer of snow covering it, but there's not at all. I do this for a while and do it in a semicircle, but no snow that reveals blood's underneath. Really strange. Now, I close my eyes for a second and I hear a terrifying scream, as well as some kind of howling sound. I turn around expecting to have to shoot some of these things, but there's nothing there. Then I realise I can hear some kind of animal nearby. I don't know what animal it is, but just some kind of thunderous growling sound, which is not too loud but detectable, like it wants me to know it's there. So I start going backwards. I'm absolutely fixated on this person that once was. It really felt horrible seeing this here. I just couldn't look away from it, and it's the only time in my life that I've ever had this before. It's like I was so fixated on this person's injury that they must have had that I forget everything else. Before I know it, I'm falling backwards again. I slap my hands down, but it's too late. I start tumbling backwards again. I come to a stop and my rifle hits the back of my head. I curse now and grab the rifle. I go to load another round in, ready to be fully loaded now, but it jams. I say, no, come on. I hit it on the ground and it makes a light thud. It's still jammed. I say, come on, you've got to be kidding with me. But alas, I'm wrong. So I just get up and start walking. I'm doing a slow kind of military walk, half squatted down. I don't want to be seen. I keep scanning my horizon, but I can't see anything. I'm walking slowly backwards. I also notice that there's no more blood at this time. I put it down to maybe the snow, but I think that's quite weird. I should have seen some more by now. I keep turning back. I can hear the growling sound once more. I decide that I need to pick up the pace a bit now, especially because I'm getting cold from being on the floor. So I start to pick up a light jog. I'm not really aiming the gun now, it was making my arms hurt holding it that way, so I'm just kind of holding it like I'm in water. But then I can hear something, much closer this time, another snarling growl. It's starting to get dark now and I do start to panic. I let off a shot in fear. It was probably lucky that I still had the gun higher than I expected, because I probably could have just killed someone then. I now realise that the rifle's actually unjammed itself and I'm really happy. I quickly put another round in and I'm ready to fight now. I think the bravery took over for maybe 1 second, but then I can hear more growling. I start to pick up the pace more. It must be those wolves. They've got to be hunting me now. I never had a situation like this before. I can let off my warning shots, but I don't know what to do other than this. I wasn't really trained for this. The thing is, there's one of me, and these are pack animals. So what if they want me? That'll be it. They'll just kill me, and then there's no more John going around anymore. I start to tear up at the thought of this. The thought of people knowing what happened to me. I guess I can go up in a tree, but how long can I stay up there for? It's going to be really hard to climb up these trees. I don't think I have the strength for it, to be honest. So I keep going now. I decide all I can do is just let off a few shots, and that's what I keep doing. I'm down to 4 rounds now, and I know I can't do this the whole way. I think I'm going to get down to my last 2, because at least then I can probably maybe kill a couple of these things. Now I hear a wolf howl. I haven't heard this before and it really scares me. It sounded so close. I quickly look round in all directions trying to find this thing, but I can't find anything. I punch down now in anger. I slowed the pace a bit. The pace I had would have been impossible to keep up with in the thick snow like this where I was now. But I keep going. Whenever I heard that they were getting close, I would let off a round. I've only got a few more left now. I have to conserve the ammunition. I don't understand why they couldn't give us more ammo. I mean, I know I'd let off a lot of rounds, but come on, we're out here alone. I start going further when I now see one finally. There is a wolf not far away. I've never seen one this close before, and this thing was absolutely massive. It was a greyish colour and it looked really horrifying. I can see some more around but not very clearly, but this one, it was terrifying. I aimed just above the tree where it is and bang, I put a hole in the tree. This thing sprints off now, but I can't see the direction it's gone, so I quickly reload and start picking up the pace more. I know that there's definitely more than 3, but I've only got 2 bullets now. It's getting more and more dark, and I know my night vision's not going to be near as good as theirs, but I have to keep going. So I press on now. It's all silent for a little while. I hope that somebody heard my shots being ringed off, but again, we don't have the radios now, so it might not have been much use. The problem is too, it's going to be really hard to find where they come from. I just hope that somebody heard it and can come and help me. I now make it back onto the path. I crash through it, leaving it open, and I start walking. Every time that I hear my feet on that wooden board, it made me feel more and more comfortable and confident. I know that I'm not that far away now. I put the safety on finally and shoulder that thing and keep going. I've probably gone for about 30 minutes straight now. I can't hear any more animals and I see some of the others. They look very panicked and rush over to me asking what's wrong. I just stand there for a moment and say, "Wolves, wolves, there's wolves out there," and they look concerned. One of the other guys goes out to get more guns, and now I have to show them where I found it, that body. I say there's somebody there, they're pretty beat up. They ask how bad is it, and I say, well, I don't think they're gonna make it. Now time is of the essence. I felt a lot better now having all 4 of us there together. They called our squad the Hunter Squad, which was kind of cool I guess, but I kind of felt like we were the pack animals now and not them, so we head out there. So we start going towards the very end of where that thing was, opening the gate again. That was some really weird thing that I've never been able to explain since actually. The gate had managed to close. I run through that, leaving it open basically, crashing, but it was closed. Strange, maybe it was just my momentum made it swing back, but I didn't hear anything. But I don't know, I could have been scared and not heard it. So now we go ahead. We're all pointing in different directions and there's one of us going a bit slower checking our 6. This is really important. I don't have more than the 2 bullets with me now, but that's fine, we have quite a few. We've all got these rifles. They're not semi-autos, but they're pretty powerful, I guess. So we start going and I say, but there was blood here. There was literally blood here. I don't understand. But we keep on going. And I can't figure out where we're supposed to be. We now stop because we can hear growling and we get down into a formation. That's when I hear the first shot. I turn around to look where it's come from and there's another. I can then see my colleague shooting away. Bang, bang, bang. 5 shots are let off in total and then there's silence. I look up and I can see some animals slouched over. There's at least 3 of their bodies and they look huge. I go over there but my colleague stops me saying, "You're crazy, you're gonna get yourself killed, John." I say, "Yeah, you're right." And I start slowly turning back. We move up now and we keep going. I finally recognise where I was because of my own footsteps, but again, there's no blood, which is strange. I see, yeah, it's right there over the hill, and we make a formation up there. The team leader then goes down to investigate Mark. He's quite brave, I've got to give it to him. He used to be in the military, so he's not really fazed by much of anything. So he goes down. He gets further and further until he puts his hand up, signaling him for us to stop. At least that's what I think he's doing. It might be in a military thing, I don't know. He then goes over to where the body is and he says, "Yeah, he's long gone." He puts his hand up, gesturing for us to come closer. We can now see that this person's probably been dead there for quite a long time. We decide that we're going to recover it the next day. It's too dangerous for us to be out there. I mean, it was good, don't get me wrong. We investigated. We thought it was somebody potentially still with life to live, but for this person, sadly, it wasn't the case. My God, that's horrible what they do to them, I thought to myself, as we turn back around and start making our way back. We then get back to almost exactly the same spot where that we've been shooting them things, but we can't see any, which is really strange. We think maybe they've limped off or something, but my colleagues are certain that they put enough into them that they shouldn't have made it. It's really bizarre. We all look at each other confused, but decide to press on. We're still holding that formation, just not as tight. Because of getting a few of them and the sounds of our rifles, they've definitely fled now. We eventually get back in, and I get sent back home again. It turns out that they could never recover the bodies of those wolves. It's really strange. The other thing that doesn't make sense is I definitely saw some blood, but that body had been there for quite a while. So I just don't understand what could have happened in that case. It was really one of the most horrible things that I ever experienced or witnessed in my life, and I'm glad that I've never seen anything like it since. I work as a fire watcher in my native country. I'd done this for a large time in my life. I'd spent some time in the military too, well, about 2 years or so, but I always enjoyed my time out in the nature the most. Now, the area that I covered was very pretty. I'm actually from the area that doesn't have lots of hills and stuff, so being out in where the hills are and the mountains was something really beautiful. I remembered that I absolutely loved this place, but one day my perspective on it really changed. Now let me explain. The land of mine actually has lots of history. My grandfather had worked out here before, and apparently he said that there was lots of weird things that would happen. Apparently they'd report some kind of mysterious figure in white. It looked like a beautiful young girl with very long flowing hair. But apparently she would float through the woods, seemingly without interacting with anything, bouncing from side to side before disappearing, making eye contact with men. He told me that they never figured out exactly why she was out there, just that it had really scared them. Apparently somebody was actually murdered here long ago, and allegedly that was her spirit haunting here. Apparently she was looking for her missing partner or something, and that's what they thought was happening, that she was here, roaming around trying to haunt them. Now, I kind of believed it, and a lot of people in my family also did. When I was a kid, I was absolutely horrified about being out here. The problem was, when I was young too, I was bigger, so I didn't have much stamina. I would find myself getting out of breath just going up the trails and things and doing the hike to the different areas we would go. So I always thought that I was especially vulnerable if anything were to happen, and that made me really scared. I was convinced that one day something was going to try and get me. So, doing my work, I would often spend lots of time out there by myself or with a small team. The most important thing that we could do is just survey everywhere and make sure that there were no fires. I had a couple of big fires though that we had to deal with. Where I live, you also had to help put out the fire if you could. It was something we'd also do to help out the fire department when they got here. We had pretty limited resources, so it was really important that we would help out and try and make a difference. I was never too worried by these fires though. There was very scarce and sparse population here, so it was pretty easy to notify people in the surrounding areas. Usually the fires would just burn themselves out. I do remember one strange thing though. I remember once during one of the fires I was helping with, I could have sworn that I'd seen a figure in the fire. It was just standing there and kind of staring at us. I only saw it for about a second or two before it eventually gone back into the flames, but it sounded just like what my grandfather had described. We knew for a fact there weren't any people here, so we weren't too worried, but we did have a quick search around. Maybe somebody got lost out there. But this thing was floating. I never really put two and two together, so I can't be certain that I actually saw the same thing as my grandfather had, but my grandfather was convinced that I had from the way I described it. I was a little put off by the whole experience, to be honest, but let me get to my main story. Now, working out here one day, I remembered that my colleagues had reported a huge fireball. They basically reported to me what could only sound like a UFO, which had crashed off somewhere, and now it was up to us to go and investigate and figure it out. The good news for me is that there wasn't any fire out here, not that we could see anyway. This happened around nightfall. They basically said it kind of looked like a meteor or something, and they were very scared about going up there. I myself wasn't too scared about it for some reason. I just thought, I'm gonna have a good hike through here, then eventually find it, and it will be something cool. Maybe something I could even take home, like a cool rock off the side of it or something. So I start my hiking, and it starts raining immediately, which again is a good sign, because if there is a fire, then we haven't got to worry too much. The rain was really going to help put it out. I remember when we started, I didn't bother looking about how far I had to go because it was quite some distance. I was on foot and had my radio, and eventually broke off from the other guys I was working with. I continue hiking and realise that I'm getting very out of breath. It was weird, it reminded me of when I was much younger and more unfit, but it was almost like any time I did an incline, I would really feel it. I wasn't even carrying that much weight on me too, and I thought I was pretty good and healthy at the time, but I guess not. It was kind of a wake-up call for me more than anything else though, because if there was actually danger, then I wouldn't have been one of the best people to help you, and I didn't like that. That didn't sit well with me. I needed to do as much as possible to help people, and I felt like I was letting down my community. Now, while hiking, every so often I can hear some faint cries. It was pretty creepy. It kind of sounded like an alien voice, to be honest, and I thought that was really weird. I wasn't really convinced there was an alien, but it was definitely a weird animal. Now, some of my colleagues actually reported this on the radios too, so I knew I wasn't the only one hearing it. I then go further and further, and I can actually see some of the trees have been scraped to the top, where obviously something crashed here, but I couldn't see anything. The cries stopped after a little bit, and I couldn't seem to locate them. I just knew it was definitely scaring me, because now it was getting to nightfall. There was some weird sound, and I wasn't sure what direction I was going in. It was kind of like the sound of something ticking over, like a constant click. It kind of sounded like an engine, but a little bit different. I also felt very uncomfortable now. The rain was giving me some kind of reassurance so weirdly. I don't know, it felt like everything else was eerily quiet. So having the sounds of nature, at least in some form, was definitely something I like to have. In this area, you can actually see pretty good through the woods. The trees were tall, but they weren't very thick. Also, the plants on either side of me only come up to about my knee height, so visibility wasn't too bad. It did mean that every so often I'd have to climb up a tree a bit to scan areas, but that was fine. I was still following the direction of the trees which were damaged, until eventually, I see something really creepy. Just up ahead, I see what I can only describe as some kind of demon. It looked like a tall figure, covered in some kind of black material, slowly lurching around. I dug down for a second and slowly lift my head up. I hear one more faint cry, and I can't figure out where it's coming from. I radio in my language that I've seen something very weird, and my colleagues respond and say that they're coming over. I was actually so scared that I stayed crouched down for another 10 minutes, and then I feel a hand touch my back. I feel like my heart stops and I have no pulse, as within a flash I turn around and it's my colleague. I swear at them and ask them, why did they make me jump like that? And they said they thought I was hurt. Did I truly look that scared? Maybe I did. I was getting paranoid now, but I decide to get up and we go towards where I heard the thing, but I don't see anything. We decide the best thing to do is to split up and I continue going to where the UFO crash site is. I keep walking and lurching through the forest until eventually I see something smouldering off in the distance. All I can see is smoke at this point and I think maybe there is a fire. I really don't know what to expect now. I really think that I'm about to be met by some kind of tall green or grey men. God knows what I've just seen. I have my Bible in my pocket and I'm clutching it very strong as I get closer and closer and start to pray. I seem to become stuck in quicksand though, and I just can't bring myself to move more forward. I had a strange sense of dread that I haven't had before, but eventually I managed to force myself to put one foot in front of the other and make my way over the horizon. Then I see it. Some kind of mangled up thing covered by trees. It's kind of white and blue in colour, which I didn't expect, covered in some kind of black silk. It then becomes more apparent what I'm looking at. This isn't a UFO at all, this is a plane crash. Within a second, I realise what's happened and I quickly scream onto the radio that we've had a downed aircraft here. What was it, a UFO? I say no, it's one of ours. It's a small aircraft. I can see that this thing has come down and obviously set on fire. Then one of my colleagues screams, we found him. I ask what, but don't get a reply. I just sprint back to their direction. By the time that I've gotten over there, I can see my colleagues surrounding a person. They're covered in jet fuel and something else, and clearly it was a pilot with half of their hair burnt off their body. They absolutely look like an alien, and I suddenly feel very faint. I actually ended up passing out now, and I can't remember much else. I just know that about 20 minutes later I woke up again, and I seemed to have a dream. I had a really long dream, which is weird because I knew I was only asleep for 20 minutes or so. When my colleagues are pouring water on my head and waking me up. There's an emergency worker then too, who's a medic checking over me. He says, are you okay? And I say, yeah, I'm fine. And I have some sugary drinks, which one of my colleagues gave me, and some snacks, and I feel much better, though I'm covered in a cold sweat. I eventually get up, and we start walking back, and there's more police coming. Eventually we all make it back, and I get to go home early because of medical reasons. Now I never actually know what come of that pilot or the plane wreckage. I just know I can't believe how scary and inhuman he looked when we found him. Poor guy, I really hope that he's okay. It was easily the most scary experience in my entire life, one that I'm never gonna forget. One of the weirdest stories that I've ever heard happened is not my own, but my father's. My father works as a Forest Service worker, and he had many weird encounters over his years. This one in particular gave me chills all throughout my childhood, and it made me constantly just question things. Now, I'll tell this exactly how my father's told me and how that he's wrote it down for me, so sit back and enjoy. I think it's truly bizarre. Now, to start out, everything's going pretty well in life. I'm happy and my wife is now pregnant. Now this is going to be our second child. We already had our other one who's about 1 now, and we're really excited to have a second. We had a boy and we were hoping for another girl. It turned out that we had another boy, but that was just as much joy into our lives. Those who haven't experienced parenthood don't understand how it changes your life sometimes, and how it changes your approach to taking risks. I know that I certainly had the same feeling too. Now, where I was based at for my job, I didn't really encounter anything too heavy. I hadn't been working this role for that many years, and there was other more experienced guys out there. In fact, a lot of the time I'd actually get quite frustrated because I really truly wanted to do more, but I just wasn't able to. Sometimes there would be things that the other guys would know that I could do, and they would just rush off to do it before I had the chance to, and it was so frustrating. I enjoyed being out there, don't get me wrong, but I was kind of stuck doing more computer stuff and just, I guess, the boring things. Now, at this place, I knew that I could progress, but it was going to take years. They basically offered me all the training and everything, but my god, it was slow. The thing was, I was probably smarter than all of the people there, just not being given any opportunities that I needed to progress. It was almost like they'd given me this form, and it said everything I needed to do, but there were holes in it that they couldn't see, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. I was quite tempted to join the Navy. I actually wanted to become a Navy SEAL at the time. It wasn't really possible because of some of the injuries I had, but I know that if I really pushed myself, I probably could have overcome them. But the problem was, even sometimes when I was doing this job, even just hiking around and doing my normal things, I would have a pain that I couldn't seem to stop from the bottom of my foot. I actually still have issues with it today. Not quite sure why it started, but yeah, it's just something I get on with. So on this particular day, it was just the same. There was more exciting call-outs and things to go and do, but literally before I could even get to the radio to say I would do it, someone would say I'm on it and would already be up there with their coffee in their hand, taking the last sips of their coffee before flying on out the door and to go and have all the fun. Yeah, it kind of really sucked doing this, but I guess it gave me more time to think and just relax a bit. The problem is, if you're like me, that time very quickly lends to boredom. I started going through some of the records and some of the reports. I basically had to reorganize them because some people in this office area, they would just throw everything onto a desk and not do anything. They would only look for items if they needed it, which of course is a very stupid idea and wastes everyone's time, but back in my day, I guess that's how it was. So I start reading through some reports. There was a few pretty creepy things on there. Some people would say that they had a feeling, like an intense feeling of fear that they couldn't describe, accompanied by a knocking on some of the trees. They were never able to locate the source of this sound, and they thought it was just animals, but it came up quite often over the years. Then I heard a really strange one. Apparently, there was a ranger that worked here, and a lot of the other people thought that he was going crazy. I was reading a second-hand account of what had happened to him. Apparently, something had spoke to him and told him the future. Weirdly though, when I looked back through another account, which was more recent than that one, some of the things that he said actually come true. And the person making the report actually noted that and how weird it was. Upon further investigation, it turned out that this person thought that he had spoke to beings or something. I don't know, kind of like aliens? They didn't describe it very well, just very vaguely. Now, it seems like many of these cases were dismissed. There were other weird things too, like a Pacific area where you'd feel very hot, completely unnaturally, to the point that you'd actually question if there was some kind of hot spring there, or something weird that shouldn't have been there, but again, they could never find the source of it. The thing that made this even more bizarre is that eventually the plants and trees and everything in the area would start to die, so you basically knew for certain that something was definitely off there. Now, I decided that I had to get out and do the very minimum just to not be in the office, and that's what I did. I remembered setting out, and I was being a little bit more paranoid than normal. I think all these stories were just playing in my head. I remembered I kept thinking that I saw something walking through the tree line above, ahead of me, always maintaining the higher ground. It kind of just trailed alongside me. It's really hard to describe, but was truly creepy. Now, I don't know what it was, but I think it was some kind of large animal there. Not big enough to be a bear, but certainly weird. I did think maybe it was a hiker out there, but it wasn't possible. I thought that was bizarre. I remember thinking to myself that you've just learnt the power of human potential in the mind, and it was pretty scary to me. Now, life goes on. We probably get to about a month or 6 weeks in, and again, they're just not training me properly. It's kind of really annoying because they'll complain at me for doing something when it's exactly how somebody's told me to do it. And they'll say, oh no, just do it confidently. But then they'll say, why did you do that? And you'll explain that's how you were trained, and they wouldn't seem to listen, and it was kind of like a hostile group. I didn't end up staying there for too long, but I'll get to that later. So what do? Once again, get reserved to balancing the books and just doing the normal work. Now this is actually at a time before we had computers, so it did make days very boring too. The problem I found is that some people just did not have good handwriting. I've never been the best at reading others' handwriting, but especially in these situations, my god, it was like some of these people had honestly made an effort to write as illegible as possible. And again, if you can't read it, they complain, so I kind of become an expert of reading these things eventually. And again, every so often there's weird reports. I realise too, quite often when it's recorded, people just think, oh, it's the other guy not paying attention. Maybe he wants everyone to look at him and stuff like that. At least that's on the report conclusion, but I had a feeling that something was off when I kept on seeing the reportings of some kind of beings out there. This spanned over a number of years too, and long before I was there. They all seemed to be described as relatively the same. They called them the forest walkers. Apparently they seemed to be quite tall, and they would walk in almost a weird limp motion. The weird thing is that they would be silent too, and if you approached them, weird things would happen. Some people said they felt almost like they were high. Others said that they would just know things they couldn't have otherwise and stuff like that. I don't know if I believe in the supernatural that much, or at least at the time I didn't, but I just considered that these were just things that happen when you've been out in the woods for too long by yourself. Now eventually as time increased, and I started complaining to the higher ups about the issues I was having, I started to get out more and do more interesting things. I even got to rescue a few people too, which is a really cool feeling. I don't know if you've ever experienced it before, but there's something so cool about knowing that you preserved human life. You stepped in and you made a big difference and impact for someone. It's not something I'd felt before in other jobs too, so I was quite happy. Now, as I go out for a patrol one evening, I remembered having a strange feeling that the air was different. There was almost some kind of metallic smell that I couldn't quite describe. I was concerned that I had some kind of illness or that I accidentally got something on my nose, but no matter how much I wipe my nose, I can't seem to get rid of the feeling. And there was almost some kind of static in the air. You know, like when you have static electric and just before you feel the buzz, it was kind of like that. Now that's when I feel something. I can tell something's looking at me and I stop to turn around and see what it is. And then I can make out some kind of figure. It's probably about 20 feet away. It's wearing kind of like a dark coloured robe, but when it gets closer it appears more white. It walks with a weird limp and I can't believe my eyes. I actually rub my eyes quickly, not sure for a second if I'm dreaming, and it's gone. Now I think this is pretty creepy. I want to figure out what this is, so filled with excitement I actually jogged towards where it was. Now I couldn't tell you too much else about it, but just that it completely vanished. I probably spent another hour myself actually searching the surrounding areas just to see if I could find something, anything there to explain what I'd just seen, but alas, I come up blank. There's nothing there but myself. Now I'm actually a little bit irritated because I don't want to seem stupid. I really don't want to become like one of the people whose stories I've read, probably to be dismissed later on the same way that I dismissed some of theirs. But currently, it seems like I'm going to have no option but for that to be the case for myself. Yeah, it sucked really. I go back eventually and tell them what happened. Now, No one believes me, which is what I expected, and they say, yeah, you're too junior to be going out there and investigating things like this. I was pretty fed up again. I come from a role before where I was very well respected, and honestly, the way I was being treated was really annoying me. Now, a few months go on, and it becomes winter, and the going gets a little bit more tough, really. It was pretty cold out there. I mean, uncomfortably so for myself. Now, I remembered on one particular day, I can't tell you specifically what I was doing, I just remembered that I was out there, that I spotted something weird. I mean, really bizarre. There were these small figures, kind of limping around in the woods, again silently. Now, I can't believe what I'm seeing. They're probably about 5 feet tall now, and in more of a white coloured gown kind of thing. Like I said, I didn't know what this was. I thought maybe it was something from Halloween, like decorations people put out there. And I actually wasn't too scared now. I was convinced that this wasn't actually a real thing or threat or danger, so I decided to sit back and very slowly follow these things. Now, I didn't look behind myself, so there could have been more, but these things just kept on marching on, kind of down the path for a good 10 minutes longer. Now, they never once seemed to notice me or so much as turn around, so again, I'm still not entirely sure what I'm seeing, but I think it's some kind of Halloween decoration that someone's playing around with. I don't know, it could be a cult, it could be anything, but I'm not too worried. I don't know if it was the size of them or what, but I just wasn't concerned. Also, there seemed to be nature interacting normally around, so that meant that these things weren't a threat, at least I thought. So this continues on until eventually they all stop at something. I stopped too, and I can see about 4 of them. I was incredibly curious as to what they were looking at, but there's no real way for me to be able to see where I'm based currently. I get closer and closer and realise that I'm going to have to take the long way round now to figure out what it is. I decide to take a stealthy approach, and I try and walk very slowly through the foliage and get around. I do make it to a pretty good horizon, and I can see in front, and I still can't figure out what they're looking at. Now, I'm sure these are people now, so I become a little bit more confident, and I walk down even closer to where they are. Eventually, I ended up crashing through some of the brush, and I decide that I'm going to be more present now. Obviously, these people know that I'm here, so what's the point of trying to hide away from them? I go a little bit quicker now, and eventually go round to where I think that they're facing, and I can't see their actual faces. It's kind of just dark where that their faces are completely covered up in something. Now, I crouch down to get a better look at them, and suddenly, I can hear voices in my head. They don't sound like voices I ever heard before too, and it's almost like my own voice but different. And I keep hearing different things that haven't happened yet. I hear about the birth of my son and know that it's going to be a boy. I know exactly what he's going to look like, how my career's going to go, what my wife's going to do, and some of the hardships that come up and who's going to pass away in my family. It actually makes me incredibly emotional at this point, and I almost feel like it's too much and start to cry a bit. I ended up kind of just becoming overwhelmed with my emotions, and I fall back into the dirt and stare up at the sky. The sky's very bright today, and it actually looks quite nice. After a moment, I kind of stop hearing the voices so much. They kind of just slowly fade out, like somebody slowly turning down the volume on a record, and I get up. I realise now that whatever these things are has gone now, and I'm just here alone, very confused as to what's actually just happened to me. I get up, and I'm sure there's going to be an explanation for this. I ended up scouring around for probably another hour and a half until I conclude that nothing's here. That's when my panic finally catches up with me, and I decide that I need to get back as quick as possible. I start making my way there. I eventually get back to the station and immediately write down my report. I didn't speak to anybody else about what had happened, and that's when I'm confused. I suddenly realised that what I was reading was very similar to some of the reports of what had happened years before, the ones where that people had considered the guys that were reporting it a little bit crazy or seeing things. And for that reason, I actually took the report and ended up throwing it into the trash. I didn't want my colleagues to think I was crazy. I mean, I didn't like most of them to begin with. I knew that this was going to hurt me moving on to the other areas that I wanted to work, so there was going to be no benefit of me actually posting this. And I ended up moving on and working as a ranger in different areas and doing different kinds of roles too, even being a fire service worker. Now here's the weird thing. I only realised it much later, but I did have a son, and he looked exactly like I knew he would. The job that I changed into is exactly what I heard I would. My wife's role too. Also, some family members that died, they were the exact people who I was told would do so as well. Now suddenly I felt kind of a weird fear come over me, almost like a wash and flood of emotions coming back, realising that something had contacted me back then, and for whatever reason wanted me to know what was going to happen. I can't put my finger on why this happened or how it happened to me. I just know what I saw was real, and that I wasn't the only person that saw those kinds of things out there. Lots of my other colleagues had experienced some very similar things, and I just don't know what to make of it all.